Live local election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM. Streaming live on Facebook and YouTube and our app. Search for Lakeshore Public Media. Tune in on Election Day beginning at 6 p.m. here on Lakeshore Public Media.
You're listening to Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM, WLPR FM Lowell, your home for local news, traffic, weather, sports, and more. Streaming online at lakeshorepublicmedia.org.
Republicans have dominated the governor's office for 2 decades. Today, Indiana voters will decide if that streak holds.
The fact of the matter is this election's about we're either going to have a governor who trusts women or who does not.
I see things that are broken.
Remember, I'm a Main Street entrepreneur that was a small business, scraping, scraping, just trying to do everything to survive for nearly half the time I ran it.
Will controversies open the door to Democrats in the Attorney General's race? Who will be Indiana's next U.S. Senator? I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting digital editor Lauren Chapman. Join us for the rest of the hour for a discussion with reporters and experts as we break down the issues that will decide Indiana's biggest races before results start trickling in. First, this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. Polls are closing at this hour in half a dozen states. NPR's Susan Davis joins me now. She's NPR's political correspondent and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Polls have closed in most of the swing state of Georgia. Polls closing a bit later in 3 counties there to give voters extra time after some polling places experienced equipment problems and others got bogus bomb threats. So how important is a win in Georgia for Trump and Harris?
I mean, a win here would be critical for both campaigns, but it's really seen as a must-win for Donald Trump. Georgia and its 16 electoral votes are part of a Southern strategy and a Sun Belt strategy where Donald Trump has been leading in the polls or stronger in the polls of states of Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. However, a Kamala Harris win here, which is also possible. Polling in the state was within the margin of error right up to Election Day. But a Democratic win here would suggest that the potential for a very strong Democratic night. Again, Democrats are really focused on the blue wall strategy, blue wall or bust, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. A win in Georgia would loosen the pressure to have an absolute win in all 3 of those states and would expand the map possibilities for her to get to the 270 electoral votes she needs. And
you and I have talked about this a little bit. The question a lot of people have tonight, when are we likely to know who has won in Georgia?
It has the potential to be quick, but it could also be slow. Georgia counts the ballots faster than many states. However, if it's close, it's also likely to be one of the most contested states because of what's at stake here. It is possible that results in Georgia, a call could come as early as later this evening or early Wednesday morning.
And we have a total of 60 electoral votes at stake here. Georgia 16, Indiana 11, Kentucky 8, South Carolina 9, Vermont 3, and Virginia 13. And we should mention at this hour that the Associated Press has made calls in a couple of races. Kamala Harris in Vermont, not a huge surprise there, and Donald Trump in the states of Kentucky and Indiana. So no big surprises there, but it's going to be shaping up, I think, for a long night. NPR's Susan Davis, thanks for joining me. Meanwhile, Americans' mood on this election day, well, in one word, dour. A large number of people surveyed in recent polls say they think the country is on the wrong track. Some conservatives see a culture that they believe is too liberal and they view as threatening their way of life. Many on the left of the political spectrum believe the rights of marginalized people and democracy itself is under threat. At the same time, both sides are excited at the prospect of getting what they want. For some, it's the return of Trump. For others, it's to make history by electing the nation's first female president. In the next hour, a batch of poll closings, including most polls in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania. That is a key election prize with its 19 electoral votes. Polls in the District of Columbia and 16 other states also closing next hour. You're listening to NPR.
Light rain and 64 degrees at 6:04. I'm Michael Gallenberger, and this is Lakeshore News. Polls are now starting to close in northwest Indiana. Polls officially closed at 6, but it may still take a while for those who were already in line to cast their ballot. Porter County has been reporting long wait times at some Portage area vote centers. Lake Central teachers are getting a pay raise. The school board unanimously approved the 2024-2025 collective bargaining agreement Monday. The Times previously reported that the contract boosts the starting salary to $55,200, an increase of $1,200 from last year. Returning teachers will see their salary increase by up to $2,200 depending on last year's evaluations. The only discussion on the contract Monday was a compliment from board member Dr. Janice Malco.
Job well done on that.
Absolutely.
The board's action also included pay raises for administrative and classified staff. The Times reports a new documentary shining a spotlight on the effort to save the Briar East Woods in Hessville. Hammond's looking to build a bridge that would displace the 4,000-year-old woods, a remnant of the high Tolliston Dunes that many Hessville residents hike for recreation. The short documentary, Save the Briar East Woods, will screen at 6 p.m. Wednesday at Paul Henry's Art in Hammond. The film chronicles the efforts of the Hessville Dune Dusters to preserve the globally rare dune and swale habitat the way the nearby Gibson Woods has been. Look for scattered showers tonight with a low around 52. With Lakeshore News, I'm Michael Gallenberger.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include National Geographic documentary films presenting Endurance. Endurance follows a team of modern-day explorers who face the Herculean task of finding Sir Ernest Shackleton's famous sunken ship. Now streaming on Hulu and Disney+.
Marketplace is supported by Viking. Exploring.
Good evening and welcome to the Indiana Public Broadcasting Election Night Special. I'm your host, digital editor Lauren Chapman. The polls have officially closed. The votes are being counted and we'll know later tonight, or right now, who won elections up and down the ballot from U.S. Senator to school board member. But while we wait for those votes to be counted, let's put everything into the context of this election season. We have several guests this evening to help us do that, including Indiana Public Broadcasting Statehouse Bureau Chief Brandon Smith, University of Indianapolis Associate Professor of Political Science Laura Merrifield Wilson, Democratic strategist and consultant Ariel Brandy, and 1816 Public Affairs Group President Mike O'Brien. But first, let's start with Brandon Smith, who is joining us from the State Republican Watch Party in Indianapolis to cover the results this evening. Brandon, there are 3 statewide races that will be decided by today's election: U.S. Senate, Governor, and Attorney General. Can you tell us a little bit about those races?
Sure. The U.S. Senate race has felt like it's been over for more than a year. Republican Congressman Jim Banks was unchallenged in the Republican primary, which is where I think most people suspected that any race in this particular seat would be won or lost. And by being unchallenged, he kind of posted to what's already being called a victory here by the Associated Press this evening. Banks, a very conservative member of Congress from Indiana, former Indiana state senator as well, been in Congress since 2016. It's a close ally of Donald Trump's. He was even at some of the vice presidential running mate meetings that or tryouts that Trump held in Mar-a-Lago earlier this year. So he'll be certainly a strong ally of Trump's or whoever, the Republicans certainly in the United States Senate. In the governor's race, the reason that Banks is heading to the Indiana or the U.S. Senate is because current U.S. Senator Mike Braun decided to leave his seat after one term to run for governor. This is an open race as current Republican Governor Eric Holcomb has been term limited from running for another 4 years after his seat. You can hear maybe perhaps applause behind me. Some of the race calls are going up on the TV screen here at the Republican Party headquarters at the JW Marriott in downtown Indianapolis. But anyway, Mike Braun, again, also a fairly conservative guy, won a crowded Republican primary for governor. 6 different candidates emerged fairly easily after all the results were counted from that path to become a Republican nominee. Faced former state superintendent, Democrat Jennifer McCormick. She was not expected to do well until the last several weeks when some polls started to show the race tightening up. A lot of national money came pouring into the race from the Republican and Democratic sides. Republicans started putting out attack ads, mailers against the Libertarian candidate, which would suggest that they were perhaps worried he was starting to siphon off votes that Braun was otherwise going to get. But again, it sounds like we might have a winner already called fairly early in the evening in the race for governor, which I don't think most people were expecting.
Not at all. I mean, if Democrats do manage to take either the governor or, I mean, it seems a little unlikely at this point, but if Democrats are able to take the attorney general's seat, it would upset more than a decade of Republican control of state offices. Can you talk a little bit about those, seemingly insurmountable odds?
I mean, Republicans have been in control of Indiana basically since the Tea Party wave of 2010. It reset the political system here in Indiana as where Democrats previously controlled a lot of the southern part of the state. Those voters tended to be older, really migrated over to the Republican Party and haven't looked back. And Republicans have been trying to claw back any victories they could since then. They've had some victories in 2010. In fact, that's the last time any Democrat won a statewide election in Indiana, was 2012, excuse me. But we've seen Democrats not be able to put up much of a fight in the last several years. We'll see if that changes tonight. But right now, it doesn't look necessarily like it will.
Certainly. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to tune in to your local Indiana Public Broadcasting station tomorrow for more reporting from Brandon on tonight's results. Brandon also talked with each of the three candidates for U.S. Senate. They all had very different views on the top policy issues this election cycle. On the issue of immigration, here's Republican Jim Banks, Democrat Dr. Valerie McRae, and Libertarian Andrew Horning.
It would take into account our labor needs in our country, putting American workers first, and then bringing in legal immigrants to fill the labor gaps.
It's not even feasible. How are you going to deport that many people? Where are they going to go? Who's going to pick up that expense for doing that? Are you going to turn us into a police state?
I have no problem with people coming here for a better life. And if they can make it through our border and, they get by our security, well, Godspeed to them if they're here for a better life.
That was each of the candidates for U.S. Senate in Indiana talking about immigration policy. Mike O'Brien is here with us in studio. He's president of 1816 Public Affairs Group. Mike, let's start with that race for U.S. Senate, which seems to apparently be over. The Associated Press has already called the race for Jim Banks. Was there really a question of Banks's victory?
Not since Mitch Daniels decided to take a pass on it. And I think, to his credit, Congressman Banks, now U.S. Senator-elect Jim Banks, did a tremendous job, ran a disciplined campaign, knew he was in the driver's seat the entire time, and just couldn't, all he could do was make a mistake and hurt himself. So he just ran a controlled campaign, and with everything else going on, he was able to do that. It's very unusual for a U.S. Senate seat to resolve itself so completely so early.
Yeah.
But that's what happened, and to his credit, he ran a good campaign and had a good plan.
I mean, we'll find out later, maybe much later, how Trump performs in Indiana tonight. Banks, of course, is closely connected to Donald Trump. He's also recognized as a rising star in the Republican Party. With that kind of show of dominance, does that give us a clue that maybe Indiana is really going to show out for Donald Trump today?
Well, so far, yeah. I mean, that's what we're seeing. If we're already calling the governor's race, we're already calling the U.S. Senate race. You can call the presidential race because Trump's going to probably run ahead of all of those other races in Indiana. And for all the talk about Hamilton County and the changing suburbs turning purple, that is clearly not anywhere near enough for Democrats to turn a statewide campaign. It could turn some local races.
Certainly.
We're seeing right now, we're seeing some close Statehouse races in Westfield and Zionsville and Carmel and those areas that are changing and have changed. But to scale that statewide is clearly not where Democrats are.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Ariel Brandy is a Democratic strategist and consultant. I'm curious, Ariel, much of the focus from the state Democratic Party, has been on the Attorney General's race and the governor's race. Is that because of the uphill battle that Dr. McRae faced?
I do think that, that is taken into consideration, knowing who you're up against and also who their allies are. Him being connected to Donald Trump, that does make it a little bit harder for someone like Valerie McRae to try to break through that type of rhetoric, and someone who has that close of an ally with the former president. I do think that, focusing on the areas in which we could have the possibility of winning, which is the attorney general's race. Destiny Wells is running for the second time statewide, and she's been able to pull the support of not only just Democrats, but Republicans and independents in between. So I do think that, it gave us as a party, an alternate opportunity to be able to support, other women that were running on the ballot statewide. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the results that we thought we would when it came to Jennifer McCormick's race, but still holding out for Destiny and the opportunity that she might be able to do and beat out Todd Rokita.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of curious. Is that a missed opportunity for Indiana Democrats? McRae would have been both the first woman and the first person of color to represent Indiana in the U.S. Senate.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that, it does. But also, let's take a look historically at the last time, we've had a Black woman hold statewide office. And that wasn't that was in the 90s, I believe, when we had Attorney General Pam Carter. So it's been a while. And we also have to be very real about the stakes for when it comes to women of color running statewide in this state. It does take a little bit more for us to be able to kind of break through the mold of putting ourselves out there, but also to raising the money. I don't think that Valerie had the resources that she needed in order to run the campaign that she needed robustly to be able to beat out somebody like Jim Banks.
I mean, Mike, I'd like to go back to you to talk a little bit about the candidate, Jim Banks. I mean, seemingly a meteoric rising star in the Republican Party and Congress just generally.
Well, I don't think he's meteoric. He didn't come out of nowhere.
Sure.
He's laid out a very deliberate political career path, and when doors have opened, whether it was a seat for the state Senate or a seat for Congress, he's been aggressive in pursuing those. And the U.S. Senate seat was the same. He was very aggressive. It's kind of the chagrin of Republicans when he went that hard against Mitch Daniels when Daniels was looking at running for it, and the Club for Growth came in and really kind of hammered Mitch and who obviously took a pass on it. That was pretty much the end of that.
Yeah.
At the end of that race. And you had Mark Carmichael running the pretty active campaign in the primary and come up short. And I think Democrats, with everything else, when you're in the as deep a hole as Democrats are in Indiana, you have to really focus on where are your opportunities. And you can't go win every race. So you got to win the ones where you actually you think you have an opportunity. And to their credit, Democrats recruited really good Statehouse candidates, veterans, up and down the ballot, who have run good campaigns. This is a more active and organized Democratic Party than we've seen in Indiana in a while. But it's a lot to bite off. Turn in a state for president, turn in a state for a U.S. Senate seat, turn in a state for seats in Congress, and trying to break a supermajority in the Statehouse.
Yeah. I mean, kind of thinking about that, we're sitting here, it's not even 7:15, and we've got two statewide races called by the Associated Press. Do you think that Democrats are making that shift? I'll ask Ariel in a second that same question, but yeah.
Republicans are surprised, so I can't imagine what's going on at Jennifer McCormick's party. And I do think, we look Republicans in recent weeks and now for several months. I mean, we came out of a very expensive, divisive six-way primary in the fall, or in the spring, which we had never done before. Went right into a convention that didn't go great in terms of kind of sticking to the program, but then pivoted to, and then Joe Biden comes off the top of the ticket for Democrats, and we see a lot of enthusiasm down ballot in Indiana, in a lot of places, including Indiana in August, for Kamala Harris. And we did think, well, maybe this is softening the margin. We don't think we're going to lose, but maybe this is a 6-point win. This is a 4-point win. Maybe Donald Rainwater gets 10 or 11, 12% of the vote. Now we've got a problem, which is why you saw some of the strategies that were incorporated by Braun and the Indiana Republican Party recently to try to lay some wood on it, on Rainwater, and slow him down a little bit if he was getting that kind of momentum, which clearly didn't turn out to be the case. When I ran the governor's campaign in 2016, the dynamics were similar. It was, there was a lot of narrative about moderate Republicans in the suburbs aren't going to go along with Donald Trump. They don't like him. And my reaction to that while I was running the governor's campaign was, look, I don't know. We're going to find that out on Election Day. But my guess is the easy analysis is usually the right one, and that was we had historic numbers of Republicans voting in traditionally Republican places. And that happened again in 20, and it happened again this year, and we're getting this almost identical outcomes.
Yeah.
Trump running hard and with a big margin, and everybody else coming in behind him.
Yeah. Ariel, turning back to you, I mean, do we, again, 7:15 on election night, having two statewide races called, do we see an opening for Democrats coming down the pipe?
I do. And I would agree. I do think we had a really good ground game focus when it came to our state house races and being able to try to break the supermajority. And we're seeing that with some of these races, like Mike said, that are neck and neck right now in some of the areas that nationally folks are even paying attention to when it comes to Indiana. Some of those suburban areas that we know are trending and shifting a little bit more purple and have been back and forth, between Democrat and Republican representation. So I know that, the Democratic Party really did heavily focus on making sure that we recruited very heavily for our House candidates this cycle. And I thought that we did a really great job at not only making sure that they were diverse in racial demographics, but also their career backgrounds, what they stood for and what they wanted to represent for the Hoosiers that were in their districts. And I have seen some first-time candidates make some really, really large impacts, especially on not even just how many doors they knocked this cycle, but the amount of money they were able to fundraise for the very first time. We've seen some really great momentum, not only in the donut counties, but also up here in northern Indiana, when you're looking at folks who are running maybe for the first time or the second time against Republican incumbents that have never been challenged before. So yeah, I think we'll make some waves there in some of these state house races. So excited to see how those shake up. But I do think that the Democratic Party did what they were supposed to do in regards to recruiting the candidates that we needed to help break the supermajority this cycle.
Makes a ton of sense. Moving on briefly, we'll probably come back to it, to the governor's race. Again, we talked about it a little bit. The race drew a lot of attention the weeks leading up to Election Day, as Brandon mentioned. And McCormick was, if she had been elected, would have been Indiana's first woman governor, breaking 2 decades of Republican control of the office. Mike, let's talk a little bit about that upset at the State Republican Party convention with Micah Beckwith selected as lieutenant governor. How did Mike Braun kind of build up enough goodwill with Republicans that probably aren't as far right as ultra-conservative, self-described Christian nationalist Micah Beckwith?
Mm-hmm. So, one, it matters how we elect these two different offices. We elect one in a popularly elected primary, and then a general election, and we elect the other, or we select the other, as both parties do, at our convention. So it's not millions of voters; it's like 2,000 party people. And I didn't read coming out of that primary. I didn't really walk out of the convention hall in June thinking that the selection of Micah Beckwith over Julie McGuire, who was Mike Braun's selection.
And endorsed by Trump.
Endorsed running mate. I didn't view that as a repudiation of Mike Braun. I viewed it as what we've seen a lot at conventions, whether it's fights over policy platforms, whether it was the selection of Mitch Daniels had an attorney general candidate in 2008 that he wanted, and the party came in, and he was popular, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a popular guy. Came in, and the party picked somebody else, picked Greg Zeller over John Cassis at that time, back in 2008. So we've seen this happen before. So I don't think it's a repudiation. I think it's a testament to Micah Beckwith doing what Diego did. Everyone scratches their head on Diego Morales, right? How's he get elected Secretary of State? Well, he does it by going to every Lincoln Day dinner in the state and spending a decade with people that are putting their name on the ballot to be a state convention delegate. That's how that happens. It's a personal relationship. It's a long-term relationship. The message was kind of, we like you, Mike Braun, but we like this guy too.
Yeah.
So why don't you go get together and go run? And that's what we're making. That's the decision we're making coming out of the convention, right? I don't think it wasn't harder than that.
Yeah, true. I do kind of wonder though, like thinking about those Mitch Daniels Republicans. I'm hearing from a handful of them myself in my own personal life that Micah Beckwith was definitely a knock on their comfort level with Mike Braun, who was already connected to Trump himself.
we can just add it to the list of things that Mitch Daniels Republicans are uncomfortable about in the in the party right now. It's where we're at. It's where we're at as a party. I mean, the first two states on the board for president of the United States in the country were, for Democrats, Vermont, and for Republicans, Indiana, followed closely by Kentucky.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for Indiana to come in and be some nuanced, middle of the road state that we thought maybe it was trending toward, it's just not. It's not the Indiana of 2004 and 2008 when we elected Democrats gave Democrats control of the Indiana House, and we gave Republicans control of the governor's office, and we elected Evan Bayh, and we did these, we had Democrats had 4 out of 4 or 5 congressional seats at the time, and we're just years from that. It's like Brian had described at the outset. That 2010 election turned Indiana into a large margin Republican state as the country was becoming more divisive. This is no different than Illinois. Illinois is not, going to go elect a bunch of Republicans because, the collar counties in Chicago are turning, purple.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the same theory, right?
It all kind of connects to one another. Ariel, with just a few minutes before we hit our break, what did Jennifer McCormick's campaign fall short in to see this kind of blowout?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily fell short anywhere. I mean, honestly, you guys you're spot on with seeing the momentum that was built over the last, couple of weeks and month into election day. She was able to get strong endorsements nationally. A lot of national money came pouring in, which is something we hadn't had in a while. For a Democratic candidate that was running for governor. So it was exciting to be able to see that, all eyes were on Indiana when it came to this race and they were paying attention. I thought she ran a strong campaign. She was talking about issues that weren't necessarily just Democrat issues. They were Hoosier issues, things that she was willing to work on in bipartisanship type of ways. And it was good and refreshing to be able to have a candidate that was talking to us in a way in which it wasn't just along one party line. And I don't think we necessarily got that, from Mike Braun's campaign when it came to talking to just Hoosiers. It felt very directed to just one party. So I don't think we necessarily fell short. The voters chose who they wanted. But, I think that she ran a really strong campaign. And I'm proud of the work that we did to get her this far. And so we'll see how the rest of the night shapes up.
I'm kind of curious, Ariel. Indiana does not, especially specifically Indiana Democrats, do not get a large influx of cash from national Democratic organizations because, again, we've become a wide margin Republican state. Do you think that, having results this early in the night, might persuade national Democrats from pushing more funds into Indiana to try and make some of these statewide races more competitive?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing it already, just this cycle. I think not only are the demographics shifting in Indiana, but, the issues that Hoosiers are caring about are also shifting too. It provides a prime opportunity for, national organizations to look at our state and say, hey, this is no longer a flyover state. Unfortunately, Indiana becomes, the first of having some of the worst legislation across the country that is then modeled by other states. So I think that a lot of these Democratic organizations are looking at us and saying, okay, we need to invest in Indiana. We know that we have to start earlier, in the election cycle. And we know that it's a ground game. So investing in organizing capacity is something that is going to be super important. We know that being able to get our state back to, that blue wave that we had in 2008, it's going to take some time. Anywhere between 5 to 10 years. We know that, Democrats haven't held a statewide office in a very long time, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to keep trying.
Thank you so much. It's election night 2024, and we're talking about the candidates, the issues, and what to watch for as results come in. Already, the Associated Press has called the race for U.S. Senate for Republican Jim Banks and the governor's race for Republican Mike Braun. More on those results and what's next coming up. I'm Lauren Chapman, and you're listening to an election night special from Indiana Public Broadcasting.
Rain and 64 degrees at 6:30. I'm Michael Gallenberger, and this is Lakeshore News. Republican Mike Braun will be the next governor of Indiana, according to a race called by the Associated Press. Braun defeated Democrat Jennifer McCormick and Libertarian Donald Rainwater to win the open seat. The one-term U.S. Senator makes a bit of history with his victory. Indiana had never elected governors of one party for more than 20 consecutive years. But Republicans' control of the governor's office will now extend past that mark. Democrats haven't won a governor's race since 2000. Braun previously served in the state legislature and was a member of his local school board. One of the centerpieces of his campaign was his business experience, growing an auto parts distribution company into a multi-million-dollar operation. Meanwhile, Republican Jim Banks will be Indiana's newest U.S. Senator, also according to a race call by the Associated Press. Banks defeated Democrat Valerie McRae and Libertarian Andrew Horning. The four-term U.S. representative is also a former member of the Indiana Senate. Banks has been a rising star in the Republican Party for years, including serving as chair of the influential Republican Study Committee in Congress. Banks is a former U.S. Navy Reserve officer and served in Afghanistan during his tenure in the state Senate. The Republican's been one of Indiana's staunchest supporters of Donald Trump and is aligned with himself on many positions shared by Trump. That includes building a wall on the southern U.S. border, deporting tens of millions of immigrants who lack documentation, and baselessly casting doubt on the 2020 presidential election results. The Republican candidate for Indiana House District 26 was arrested on Sunday for allegedly violating a protective order. From Indiana Public Broadcasting, Dylan Piers-McCoy has more on the last-minute development.
Republican James Schenck is challenging incumbent Democrat Chris Campbell to represent West Lafayette and part of Tippecanoe in the Indiana House. Schenck is the subject of two protective orders that were issued earlier this year. The Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Office told Indiana Public Broadcasting that Schenck had violated a protective order that bars direct and indirect contact. Schenck allegedly commented on one of the person's social media posts in violation of the order. Schenck was arrested Sunday. He was booked in jail on Monday before posting bond. Schenck told WFYI by text that the arrest was, quote, a clickbait story generated by a hostile and sometimes violent loon who has spent months trying to derail or sink my campaign. I'm Dylan Piers-McCoy.
Your weather forecast calls for scattered showers tonight before 9 o'clock, otherwise mostly cloudy with a low around 52. Breezy with wind gusts up to 30 miles per hour. With Lakeshore News, I'm Michael Gallenberger.
This is an election night special from Indiana Public Broadcasting. I'm Lauren Chapman. Indiana voters chose candidates and races up and down the ballot today, and we're talking about three statewide races: U.S. Senate, Attorney General, and Governor. Our guests are University of Indianapolis Associate Professor of Political Science Laura Merrifield Wilson, Democratic strategist and consultant Ariel Brandy, and here in the studio, 1816 Public Affairs Group President Mike O'Brien. Laura, let's take things over to you with two statewide races called fairly early in the process. Let's start first, though, with the U.S. Senate race. I think most politicos called the U.S. Senate race shortly after Banks announced his run in late 2020, and certainly after Mitch Daniels bowed out of the race. What, if anything, should Hoosiers read into that kind of seemingly insurmountable resources that Republicans have poured into this particular statewide race?
Well, I think this race is especially interesting to look at because you did have a potential challenge with Mitch Daniels months out, and then he declined to run. And then you did have the Rust challenge, and that one was thrown out. So effectively, by declaring his candidacy quite early, I think when you're looking at this, Banks was able to clear the field in a certain way. And it did feel like somewhat of an invisible candidacy. He didn't have to compete the same way we saw Braun and other challenged Republicans. We should talk about Rokita in the same way, too. So the balance felt quite a bit different relative to other Indiana races. I would add also quite a bit different than other U.S. Senate races. When we're talking about whether or not Republicans can take back the Senate, it wasn't a question if this seat would really much change from one Republican hand to another. The focus has been much more in terms of West Virginia, not even competitive, Ohio, Montana, right? Some of those races we're watching very keenly. But I think that's really what you can take away from this race, and very unusual given all the other races we had on the ballot. This one just didn't get the same amount of attention, the traction, and banks seemed to walk away with it very early on, long before ballots were even cast.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the governor's race. I mean, I don't know that most people would have guessed that the governor's race would have been called quite this early in the evening. Kind of the same question. What should Hoosiers take away from that?
Yeah, I will say I thought that was very surprising, especially when you're talking about the timing not having in Marion County votes completely counted. And same thing in terms of Lake County, which are two very populous counties, but also they tend to lean Democratic. We'll see what the final margins are. So being called so early would indicate, of course, that it was fairly one-sided in terms of Braun. I will look at those margins, though, and say, how competitive was this? I felt like McCormick was one of the stronger Democratic gubernatorial candidates we've had in recent election cycles, with all due respect to previous candidates, too. But she put up a strong campaign. We had several debates in this race. It felt like I really thought the candidates did a great job explaining the major issues and why the governor's race is so important. We're one of 11 states that elects their governor at the same time as their president. So a lot of times you have a coattail effect and people pay less attention to this race. That was not the case here in 2024. The fact that it was called early is surprising. We'll look and see in terms of those margins just how close it was. And also in terms of roll-off voters, how many people voted perhaps at the top of the ballot differently than further down the ballot. One more thing, Lauren, I'd love to add here is the presence of Donald Rainwater, the Libertarian candidate. He was on the ballot in 2020 and really made a difference in terms of 11 or 12%, probably mostly taking away from Eric Holcomb, who's the incumbent up for re-election, obviously won. When we look at margins, I'm going to be curious to see what kind of impact did the third-party Libertarian candidate make in this race? What was Rainwater's impact? And I think we won't be able to see that until, of course, we have all those votes counted in.
Certainly. And I mean, same thing goes for the U.S. Senate race. We'll certainly see how much Andrew Horning was able to pull in that particular race as well. I mean, we talked a lot about Libertarian candidates in the 2020 election as a result of what seemed to be a Republican frustration with Governor Eric Holcomb's response to COVID-19. Does that say something about libertarians in the state that they seemingly did not make as much of a splash this year?
It might. And I think one thing to consider are just like the political climate and their circumstances, where the candidates and the parties can really attach themselves and resonate with voters. And maybe this year was certainly harder. I think if you go back to 2020, as you're talking about, especially during COVID protocols, it felt like there was dissension within the conservative coalition and clearly the tension within the Republican Party. Those votes that went to the Libertarian candidate in that gubernatorial race, for example, seem to be clearly coming from Republican defectors. And if we don't have that in this cycle, I would say two potential reasons, right? Two factors that I would consider. The first is the circumstances of the election. Big issues were abortion and immigration, even though it's more of a national issue, obviously a sticking point for the parties. And beyond just the circumstances of the races, I think you also look at this in terms of the impacts of other races on the ballot, right? Other things that people are looking at, other things that people are considering. And Braun himself is more conservative than Eric Holcomb. So it makes sense to me that if you're a conservative voter and you voted against Eric Holcomb but for a Libertarian candidate in 2020, you might find Braun as a candidate more appealing. I think it'll be interesting to see what a Braun administration looks like, because it does seem to be quite a bit different example, what we've seen in terms of the last 8 years with Holcomb, maybe in some ways a reversion back to Mike Pence, who was more socially conservative than Holcomb, certainly more outspoken on those issues. Right? But I think when we're looking in terms of that race, certainly the larger climate politically, but also the individual, say, cast and characters, right? The politicians themselves, where they stand ideologically and how much that connects with their voting.
Kirsten Adair is Indiana Public Broadcasting's education reporter. Kirsten, thank you so much for also joining us in the studio today. The governor's race is going to fundamentally, or has already fundamentally, shaped the future of Indiana education. McCormick herself was the last elected state superintendent of public instruction as a Republican before the position was made into an appointed one, which, of course, that appointment comes from the governor. Kirsten, Braun and McCormick both released education plans over the last several months. Can you give us an idea what voters should be expecting now from Braun?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the, first pillars of Braun's education plan involves expanding school choice. Indiana in past years has continued to expand that program. Last budget session, lawmakers expanded that program so families with incomes below $220,000 are eligible for that. Braun wants to take away that cap and create universal school choice. So that would expand Indiana's voucher system even further. And then another tenet of Braun's education plan involves teacher pay and benefits. He hasn't specified exactly what teacher pay should be, but he has indicated that teachers in higher demand professions or teachers who have better student outcomes, perhaps, should receive more pay and should be kind of rewarded based on student performance. That's something that he's also mentioned with schools and teacher prep programs, kind of with those prep programs, partnering with programs that are not seeing the same sort of returns and rewarding those who are just seeing a lot of progress, a lot of good things from their teachers. School safety is another area where Braun would really like to, just create some changes. So he proposed developing the Indiana Office of School Safety, and that would be a coordination between the Indiana Department of Education, the Indiana Department of Homeland Security, and the state police. And he proposes that that office would be led with someone who has experience in school safety and knows how to handle emergency responses.
And so that sounds like kind of building on what we've already seen from the Secretary of Education of Indiana currently, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Moving on to our final race of the night, though not our final topic of the night, the Attorney General's race. Todd Rokita has courted a fair share of controversy, including accusing the Indiana Supreme Court's Disciplinary Commission of, quote, aiding and abetting his political detractors. Laura Wilson, let's take things back to you ever so briefly. You spoke to Brandon Smith a few weeks ago about that race. Tell us a little bit about the landscape of that race and why Democrats think that Destiny Wells might be able to pull off this upset.
Well, certainly Wells is a strong candidate. And I say that with the caveat and understanding that she's been on the ballot the last two election cycles, both for Secretary of State against Diego Morales in 2022, and now, of course, for Attorney General against Todd Rokita in 2024. She's been on the ballot both times and she hasn't been successful, but she has all the makings of a successful candidate. Again, when we talk about dynamics and climate, there are so many things that candidates and campaigns themselves can't necessarily control. I think that is where you see the bench for the Democratic Party. That's where you see the future and opportunity is a candidate like Wells. And ultimately, she wasn't able to make it to the finish line, right? Wasn't able to be successful in this race. But it did feel like one where the Democrats had a real opportunity. And when you're considering Rokita has been incredibly controversial as Attorney General, got some negative attention in that role. I will say he's always been true to self and character, and he's had a long political career, and he's been very consistent in that. People may love or hate him because of it. But in this case in particular, I think you do see a down ballot effect because it is a presidential election cycle. I think Rokita also was able to to successfully convey to voters he was more than just that controversial abortion litigation and case. And certainly we talk about down ballot and coattails. It doesn't hurt that right now those margins for Trump in Indiana are looking very similar to what we've seen in the last two presidential election cycles. We're talking 17% back in 2020 and 19% in 2016. We're one of 7 states that still allows that straight ticket vote. It's the second question you got on your ballot, where you can vote for just Republicans, just Democrats, and you don't even have to fill in anything else in terms of those partisan races. That's always going to benefit the party in power. In this case, in 2024 in Indiana, that's going to be the Republicans.
Ariel, Brandy, let's move over to you. Do you think the Wells campaign did enough to cut through the political noise to unseat Todd Rokita?
I do. I think that Destiny ran a really strong campaign. I mean, it's her second time running statewide. And we know the last time when she ran for Secretary of State against Diego Morales, she did close the margins along the way, specifically in the areas of the state that folks are paying attention to now, looking at Hamilton County and the surrounding donut areas of Indianapolis. And we know that she does have strong support in major counties up here in northern Indiana, like Lake, St. Joe, Elkhart County. And those are some of the counties that we're still waiting on results to come in for. And so I do think she has a strong chance. And we talked earlier in the show about national dollars being poured into the race. That happened again with this race. She got the national attention she needed to be able to have the resources to run a strong campaign with a strong campaign team and also be able to get her message out. And the great thing about Destiny running the second time around is that I felt like her message was really strong again for Hoosier voters, similar to Jennifer McCormick. She ran a campaign that wasn't just tailored to just one party. It was for everyone. And I do feel like voters, have been fed up with Todd Rokita and some of his antics. And she was able to talk to them straightforward about the issues that mattered the most to them. One of those being reproductive freedom and being able to fight for the rights of women being able to choose and have control over their bodies. And she was very open about that very early on in her campaign. So I do think that she still has a chance. And as results continue to come in, some of those larger counties that she would need to be able to pull this off, I think that she can do that.
I'm curious. I wonder how effective Destiny Wells might be if she is able to pull off unseating Todd Rokita. If we're going into a Republican governor's office and potentially also likely a Republican legislature as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's equipped and ready to be able to do the job on day one. I mean, the good thing about Destiny is that, she has worked in the Attorney General's office before. Mm-hmm. So she does have the experience. She knows what to expect. She's also served our country. And she's done that, not along certain party lines, but for everyone. So I think she's prepared. And throughout the entirety of her campaign, she's, met with Democrats, Republicans. And while she has been pretty loud about, how she's felt about Todd Rokita and how he's governed our state, she has also been pretty, fairly respectful to other Republicans across the aisle because she does understand what she is up against here in Indiana, running as a Democrat statewide. Your chances of serving with someone on the other side of the aisle from you is highly likely. And I think she is prepared and equipped to be able to do that.
Mike O'Brien, Rokita won his 2020 race with nearly 60% of the vote, and he's not an unknown name by any stretch of the imagination for Indiana voters. I remember Todd Rokita's Secretary of State ads as a child, and he's served as.
Was that 2006?
Yeah, I think so.
I ran that race in 2006. I'm a lot older than you. They were good ads, though.
They were ads. They were certainly ads.
They weren't what you're getting today. How about that? A friendlier time.
Exactly. Do you think that this is a tight race? Do you think that this will end up being the tight race that Democrats expect?
What's interesting, and let me just give you one data point that because we don't have a lot to rely on right now, right? It's like 7:45. Early voting in Hamilton County, which is the part of the state you need, or the type of county with communities you need to flip a race like that, or any statewide race.
Yeah.
But Rokita ran. Trump lost the early vote. Braun lost the early vote. Banks got 51%, and Rokita got 51%.
Interesting.
So those are the people you need to make inroads with. And they flipped on Trump, they flipped on Braun, and then came home for Banks and Rokita. Now, not by a huge margin,
sure,
but that's a part of the state that you can't go lose 85 counties and break even in Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to go run the score up because you're just out of people in South Bend and Lake County, and Lake County's not even what it used to be.
Yeah,
you know, north of 30, right, in Lake County. You know, so and no one gets it more than me with Todd Rokita. I've got myself in a little hot water here from time to time on Weekend Review, but. So I understand it. I understand the frustration with not being able to make an inroad. It's very similar to Diego. Democrats thought they had a lot of dirt on Diego, and he wins by 15 points. It's like back to kind of what we were talking about before. When you're in a hole that deep and you start looking at, okay, you've got the presidency, you've got a U.S. Senate race, you've got a governor's race. Oh, we also have this administrative office for attorney general that, you know, has had some, you know, controversy to it.
Absolutely.
But who cares? I mean, to get not who should care, or that I don't care, but you just there's only so much bandwidth, and when you have, especially the national environment is loud and like dysfunctional and chaotic as it is right now, it's really hard to get voters to come home and go, hey, look at this guy who's running this administrative, basically running a law firm inside a state government that you don't really care about. It's just hard to make those connections, and that's why we're seeing, even though there's a lot of storylines you could run, and I do think Destiny Wells is a good candidate. She's just running a really hard place. Yeah. You know, to go in.
I mean, even talking about like the national conversations, I mean, Rokita, you know, found himself at the center of controversy in much the same way that Dr. Caitlin Bernard did. And so I wonder if Rokita's propensity for courting controversy might be what could end up getting Wells over the finish line.
It's like, well, why does Donald Trump act the way he does? Because all he is rewarded for it.
Yeah.
Or if he's not rewarded for it, he says he got cheated. Right.
Yeah.
But and it's in Rokita, I mean, he has hit on some things that Hoosiers care about. You know, we have some issues that are really controversial, culture war issues and other things that he's wrapped his arms around, but largely, and love it or not, I don't love it, but those things are still popular in Indiana.
Yeah.
And they're it's, you know, we're not sitting in the center of Marion County. You can drive 20 miles in any direction and the attitudes are flipped.
Certainly. My script is all messed up because of the timing today. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for talking about the Attorney General's race. Of course, we will wait for those results to come trickling in. And of course, for those of you who are listening, join us tomorrow morning to hear reporting from Brandon Smith. Kirsten, let's take us back to you. There are 3 schools that have school referendums on the ballot this year, including Lake Station, which is in Lake County. Can you tell us a little bit about what they are asking for and why the stakes may be so high for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year, Kokomo School Corporation, Lake Station School Corporation, and Twin Lakes School Corporation are all asking for referendums. Lake Station is basically asking voters to approve an extension to a referendum that was passed in 2017. They had asked last November, and voters said no. This year, they have had to do away with some busing, and they've had to make some cuts. But that funding from the 2017 referendum ends at the end of this year. So if they don't make up for that funding, they're going to have to make further cuts.
Can you talk a little bit about what some of those cuts were? I mean, it was Spanish language classes and other things as well.
Yeah, so a lot of those cuts involved support staff, extracurriculars for students, things like foreign languages. And I think one of the most significant cuts they had to make was to transportation. So rather than being able to bus kids to school 5 days a week, they were only able to bus kids to school 2 days out of the week. And those other 3 days were e-learning. If this current referendum does not pass, they are at risk of having to eliminate busing in the future completely, which would mean the responsibility to get kids to and from school would be solely on parents.
And you talked to Lake Station superintendent a couple of weeks ago, a month ago? Time has no meaning. At some point, do they feel confident at all, or is it a little bit everything's a little bit in the air right now still for Lake Station?
Yeah, so they've been doing a lot more outreach this year. They've had some programming over the radio. They've held town halls, information meetings, just to try to educate voters a little bit more. It can be tricky because the language on the ballot can be a bit confusing.
Yes.
State lawmakers did make some changes to that language in 2023. And so the way that it's worded on the ballot can be a bit confusing to voters. It can make it seem like their property taxes are going to increase quite a bit more than they actually will. And that makes voters more likely to say no to referendums. So the biggest thing that Lake Station has been trying to do is educate voters on exactly how much their property taxes would increase and just make them informed before they go to the ballot or to the polls and cast their ballots.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about Kokomo and Twin Lakes. What are they asking for?
Yeah, Kokomo and Twin Lakes are both asking for predominantly money to pay teachers and staff. This is Kokomo's first referendum, so that would be a really big deal for them if it passes. And it's a little bit new to the area, but Kokomo's superintendent says the goal is to make them a little bit more attractive, a little bit more competitive among other schools in the area. So they're just hoping to pay teachers a little bit more, retain their current staff, and then fill other positions that are currently open. And Twin Lakes is also hoping to bump teacher pay.
And this isn't Twin Lakes' first school referenda, is it?
No, it's not.
Okay. I mean, we've talked a little bit about school referenda fairly recently, and that, lawmakers across the aisle seem to be very interested in moving away from school funding through school referenda. Can you talk a little bit about what we might expect during the legislative session, and a little bit maybe about a little less about why we are kind of find ourselves in this position?
Yeah. So a tax expert, Larry DeBoer, he worked at Purdue for a long time. He said that Indiana has a problem with property taxes. They keep increasing, so lawmakers will impose caps, but those caps really mean less funding to cities and schools and local government units. That does impact schools in a big way, and that can be one of the reasons that schools are asking for referendums. Less than half of the schools in the state have asked for referendums, but those that do say that it makes a really big impact when they get that referendum funding, and it can leave a big hole when they don't.
Yeah.
And, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, but basically the idea is that referendums kind of fill in for some of these tax caps, although it can be a double-edged sword because in some of those areas where schools are getting less money, people are probably seeing their property taxes increase quite a bit. So that can also make them less likely to say yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our guests tonight, Indiana Public Broadcasting Statehouse Bureau Chief Brandon Smith and education reporter Kirsten Adair. Also, University of Indianapolis Associate Professor of Political Science Laura Merrifield-Wilson, Democratic strategist and consultant Ariel Brandy, and 1816 Public Affairs Group President Mike O'Brien. So far, the Associated Press has called the governor's race for Republican Mike Braun and the U.S. Senate race for Republican Jim Banks. Stay with your local Indiana Public Broadcasting station for the latest results and news on the 2024 general elections. I'm Lauren Chapman. Thank you for joining us, and good night.
if you're like me, the first thing on your mind is getting something to wake you up. So turn on the radio. NPR's daily news program, Morning Edition, has been working through the night to get you the news you need. It's as essential to your morning as a good cup of coffee. So hit the ground running by listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tune in for Morning Edition from 4 to 9 a.m. with local news beginning at 6 here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM. Are you curious about your baby's development? Want to discover what's really going on in your toddler's brain? Join Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhower of First Things First Porter County as she converses with local experts, parents, and practitioners about the building blocks for brain and language development. Tune in Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Lakeshore Public Media for Building Blocks, the podcast. And to find out more about Building Blocks, visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks. It's Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day, or if you do celebrate it, Guy Fawkes Day. Remember, the 5th of November. Good evening, I'm Tom Maloney, your host for the next 2 hours. And how will we remember the 5th of November? A day in which Americans vote for their first woman president in Kamala Harris, or a day in which Americans vote to elect a convicted felon in Donald Trump. We'll get into all of that and more. But first, NPR News.
PR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Another big batch of poll closings at this hour, but of the 16 states in the District of Columbia, none has more weight than Pennsylvania with its 19 electoral votes. NPR's White House correspondent Tamara Keith joins me now. Tam, polls have now mostly closed in Pennsylvania, the state which has seen the most campaign spending by both candidates. Why is it this state so critical?
Math. Simple math. It has 19 electoral votes. It's a state that Trump won in 2016, that Biden won in 2020, and could easily swing either direction this year. It is one of those states that is just incredibly close in the polls, and now we're finally going to start seeing results. But not that quickly, because Pennsylvania is one of those states that doesn't allow election workers to begin counting ballots, absentee and mail ballots, until Election Day itself. So we are expecting results coming in from Pennsylvania to come in slowly. You might remember Pennsylvania wasn't called until Saturday after the election 4 years ago.
Yeah, 4 days. I mean, this is the big prize, though. This is the one they both won, right?
And they are spending so much time there. I can't tell you how many times I've been to Pennsylvania in the last 3 months, but it's a lot. And they are spending time. They are spending money. It is clear that the Keystone State is the key because if Trump can win Pennsylvania, then he deprives Harris of many paths to that 270 electoral votes. And if Harris can lock up the blue wall, she's essentially won.
And what else are you going to be watching tonight?
Well, I will be watching North Carolina and Georgia. Those are two states where we are likely to get more results more quickly. And of course, there are a number of congressional races. We won't know control of the House probably for maybe a week because California, again, counts its votes pretty slowly. And several of the key races are out in California.
All right, NPR's Tamara Keith. Thank you, Tam. One message likely to be repeated over and over as the vote counting begins in this 2024 election is that it may be a while, as we said before, the final results of these races are known. What pollsters call a blue shift or a red mirage, the idea of states that appear to be going one way can change direction as more precincts report. And states that have been called as of this hour, Donald Trump has won Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and according to the Associated Press, the state of Florida, and also the Associated Press has called the race for Kamala Harris in Vermont. Also in the first flip of a Senate seat, the Associated Press calling the race for Republican Jim Justice in West Virginia. We'll be keeping an eye on all of these races and many more as the evening goes on. But we have more polls that have been closing, and more polls will be closing in the next hour as well. So stay tuned. You're listening to NPR. Wisconsin is a key swing state in this year's election. It's been decided by less than 1 percentage point in 4 of the last 6 presidential races. Wine Silver member station WWM spoke to voters there.
At a polling place in a predominantly black neighborhood, 25-year-old Keshania Johnson was pushing her niece in a stroller after she voted for the first time. She was not sure if she was going to vote, but she was nudged to do so by friends and family.
I just want to see a lady be in the seat. I just want something different. We always had a man in the seat. Why we can't get a lady in the seat?
Miles away in the suburb of Waukesha County, the heart of Wisconsin's Republican Party, businessman Ken Robinson says he voted early for Trump.
I don't think we have the best candidates to choose from in this election, but it's an easy choice between Harris and Trump.
Small shifts in the voting blocks could decide if Trump or Harris wins Wisconsin. For NPR News, I'm Ayan Silver in Milwaukee.
And the Associated Press is making more race calls at this hour, calling Massachusetts, Maryland, and Rhode Island for Democrat Kamala Harris. While much of this election day is focused on the top of the ticket and crucial House and Senate races, there are also some major ballot initiatives being decided across the country. 10 states have measures dealing with abortion or reproductive rights before the electorate. There are also half a dozen measures dealing with the legalization of marijuana for recreational or medical use. A West Virginia measure would ban physician-assisted suicide. More polls will be closing, as we mentioned, in the 9 o'clock hour. Those include two key swing states, Arizona and Michigan. I'm Jack Speer, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include National Geographic documentary films presenting Endurance. Endurance follows a team of modern-day explorers who face the Herculean task of finding Sir Ernest Shackleton's famous sunken ship. Now streaming on Hulu and Disney+.
Good evening. I'm Tom Maloney, and welcome to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM. We're streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and our app. Search for Lakeshore Public Media in your app store. Joining me tonight in studio are Lakeshore Public Media's Chris Nolte, as well as Nico Cassis, Assistant Librarian for Teaching and Learning at Indiana University Northwest. Nico, did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. And then we've got Marie Eisenstein, Associate Professor of Political Science at Indiana University Northwest.
Also got that right.
Excellent. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us here in studio for live election night coverage. How is everybody doing? Staying dry?
Maybe.
The rain on the ceiling is a little bit, it's really meditative, so yeah.
It is, and I apologize to listeners if you do hear that at all in terms of the rain coming down this evening. But of course, it is one of those things where the rain on Election Day can impact voter turnout. And of course, voter turnout, one of those things that we'll be watching for tonight. And roughly 1.4 million Hoosiers have voted early, millions more voting today. 1.8 million voted early in 2020. Meanwhile, just over 500,000 voters Hoosiers voted early in 2016, and we'll have to keep an eye on how those numbers continue to swell throughout the course of the evening. And I asked at the beginning, how will we remember the 5th of November? So I posited to all of you, for Chris, Nico, and Marie, how do you think the history books are going to look back on November 5th? Marie?
Well, I'm just going to answer with a hope. I hope that the history books will look back and say, we thought it might be chaotic. Surprisingly, it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And there was peace at home and abroad on November 6th and 7th and 8th and 9th.
I like that optimistic view.
I'm going to go with the optimism.
Fingers crossed there. Nico, how are historians going to remember the 5th of November?
I think especially in terms with like 2022, I think it really does have a lot to do how just different it was from 2020 and in terms of 2016 in terms of technology, with artificial intelligence and with misinformation and disinformation campaigns. So you will definitely be able to see as how just much people are locked in online on the major social media platforms. Even though, everyone was home in 2020, but in 2024, everyone is out and about, close to normal. And so, but we do see a lot of just the changes fundamentally with social media platforms and just using online activists using these platforms for their advantage.
Yeah, we do have some microphone issues. I think maybe Marie and Nico, we might have to have you guys share Marie's mic until we can get that swapped out, or Chris and Nico. So I apologize for that for listeners. We'll get it fixed. Chris, how are historians going to remember the 5th of November?
Well, I saw this from, one of the columnists that had something about it, and I have to borrow it too. It's cautiously optimistic. Is a way I've seen a couple people put it as to whether this election is going to be one that's going to be a bad one to think of, or if it's going to turn out to be good. And as Marie mentioned, that we can only hope for the best, I suppose, and hope that it turns out well. That we don't. We know it's probably going to be into the days after tonight before we actually find out who is the president, because it's just going to take that long, I think, to get all the ballots counted and brought in together. But I think here's an opportunity to we're certainly testing the system, whether the entire system works or not, and with all the concerns about whether the system will work or not, that it's going to turn out well.
And I think for a lot of us who have been around elections for a number of years, we see and or recognize and understand the fact that elections are oftentimes not called on election night. We can remember the days of 2000 and Gore v. Bush, when it took days and days and days and days before we finally got an outcome there. Of course, it was late in 2016, into the night of 2016, when then Republican nominee Donald Trump won, but we found out within a matter of hours through the overnight that he had won. And Clinton had, called up with her concession phone call, and Donald Trump had given his victory speech. But in 2020, it dragged on for quite some time before we found out that Joe Biden was ultimately victorious over then presidential candidate Donald Trump.
Can I speak to that issue of how long it takes to learn who won?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because this is something that we just in this on-demand world. I want to be able to click on the button and get the information. I want to do a Google search and find that info out right away, but it doesn't work like that.
Well, but that's the thing. 45 years ago, the 1980 election between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, the networks were calling the election before the polls were closed on the West Coast. And there was a lot of criticism saying, hey, the network shouldn't be calling elections before everyone who's going to vote has voted. And so you fast forward 40-ish years. I can't do math on my feet, obviously. And we now have voting systems in place where we're saying we will not know who won on election night. And yet, as you talked about, in an on-demand world, we have way more technology now. I don't view the 2000 election in the same category as 2020 or 2024 because that was one state.
Right.
There actually was a vote total, but that vote total was so close. I think many statisticians called it a statistical tie. So depending on what Florida's laws were, either there was an automatic recount if it was within a certain margin, or the candidate clearly had, and the candidates did, clearly had the right to ask for a recount because of the slim margin. But it wasn't because the votes weren't counted. So we didn't have this until 2020. I understand why it happened, because we had the COVID year and we had different practices being put in place in different states in terms of how people were allowed to vote.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we have to ask ourselves if it is good for us to drag out election results over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. And instead think of ways that when we have an election day, along with all the early voting that we allow, that we somehow put systems and practices into place so we can go to bed at night, or maybe even the wee hours in the morning, and know who won.
Right. Really quick, Marie, if I can have you pass over the microphone to Nico. We're going to get the microphone switched out here at the next break. It's amazing how quickly I can run around and grab a microphone. But to the point that she brings up, and the delays in those numbers, the delays in knowing, your expertise and your knowledge base, Nico, really revolves around AI imagery, sort of, as we would call it, fake news, things that aren't really real or things that didn't really happen. And so for conspiracy theorists, what they often like to do is fill holes when there are questions. And it's really easy to fill a hole with audio that is created or edited to sound like something that happened, with video or pictures. What kind of an impact does that have now for voters when they're waiting for those numbers to be able to see those returns? But now maybe there's a picture of Kamala Harris, sneaking around a ballot box in a county in Georgia. Maybe there's a picture of Donald Trump trying to break down the doors of a county office in Pennsylvania, but those events didn't happen.
Yeah, there's a few things that I want to say to that to unpack here is that what we also want to take a look at is that no matter what happens tonight, and he did this in 2020 and 2016, is that no matter what the results will say, I believe Donald Trump will probably preemptively declare himself the winner, regardless of what counts. So, those statements will come from verifiable direct official communications from the former president. So you'll see it all. He may declare premature victory on his official Truth Social, on his official X account, and Instagram accounts, of all of his social medias. So, and it's like those are not fake generated. Those are actually coming from the president. So you just have to realize that we have to take a step back and just count every vote. And to make sure, in Associated Press, they're on the front lines. The AP is on the front lines, and media all over the world are going to be relying on AP, not just the country, but on declaring winners per every state. So, and the other thing I want to talk about in terms of just how fundamentally, specifically, the social media platform X has just changed with the blue check marks, that anyone could get a blue check mark. You just need to whip out your credit card.
I used to have one when you had to be verified, or you had to actually be a journalist. And then when they got removed, I'm like, I'm not paying $4 or $6 for a check mark. But
exactly.
Yeah, you're right. Anybody can do it now.
Anybody could do it. So it's like, just because they have a blue check mark does not mean that they're a reliable, verifiable source right away. So, so keeping things, there's just right now the energy is very high on X. It's very high on Instagram, on Reddit, and all the major social media platforms, and everyone's just really charged up. But when you are scrolling through your phone, when you are on your computer, when you are on social media platforms, just take a step back, be mindful of what you're looking at. If you see a return come in early, you want to make sure it's coming from a verifiable source, whether it be the AP, our network here, and everything. Just make sure you just double check, triple check other sources to see if that is legit, rather than someone just randomly with a blue check mark.
Well, no blue check mark here, but several races called almost right off the bat here in the Hoosiers state. Mike Braun is now our governor-elect. He is currently a senator, leaving that seat because in Indiana you cannot run for two seats, and so you can hold one and run for another, but you have to give up the one that you're holding. The seat that he was holding as U.S. Senator has now been won by Jim Banks. Jim Banks now becomes U.S. Senator-elect, and Donald Trump has collected the 11 Electoral College votes for the state of Indiana early on. And so those numbers kind of coming out of the polling data relatively quickly. Chris, to Marie's point here that it's a lot easier to go to bed at night knowing those numbers coming in. Is there a surprise, though, when we look at the race for Jennifer McCormick, who really had a late surge at the end here, who looked like it might be close? And I know that during the conversation with IPB News the hour beforehand, some of the guests talking about wanting to look at some of the exit polling data and look at how close that race ultimately becomes. But at that point, it's an autopsy for the Democratic Party.
Right. I'm going to be curious to see how she did in Lake County as well as in Marion County, because those are the places that she had campaigned hard, either by herself, alone, or with other people with her. And I'd like to see what kind of returns that she will have gotten here in Lake County in particular, and maybe even in Marion County, because of the fact that she'd worked so hard to try to turn things around. And even though it won't matter, unfortunately, for the total vote, but at least we know for sure at least how strong that she would have done. Certainly here in Lake County in particular.
I know one of the numbers they were looking at as well is Hamilton County. We'll be getting into some early returns with Michael Gallenberger coming up here in just a few minutes, as Lake County has posted their early vote totals. And that's a conversation I think we'll be getting into here coming out of the break, are those early vote totals. But I guess for the roundtable discussion here, and just the few moments we have before we get into the get into those numbers and some other conversations. Early on, do we think the rain played a role in Election Day turnout? Chris?
I don't know. If people were waiting until the very last minute, before 6 o'clock, they might have encountered more rain because we've had some heavy showers here at times. Yeah. But I think it will have some impact. But I think there are enough people who voted early that may make a difference. People maybe if they have the opportunity, whether it's by a write-in vote, so to speak, by turning in a ballot in the mail, or by going to the poll to the different early voting places, and there are so many, certainly in Lake County, as opposed to some counties. Some counties didn't have just a handful of early voting locations. So I think that would not make up entirely for Election Day, but I think that it'll probably have set a good pace ahead of Election Day. And certainly has, we know for sure in here in Lake and in Porter counties in particular, that the voters came out early. They wanted to vote early, and they've done so.
And I should note, if you are still in line braving the storms, you have to stay in line, and they will let you vote all the way through that process. Just because the polls have closed and you're in line doesn't mean you get booted. So stay in line if you are still in line, or if you know somebody who's in line and you're listening right now to live election night coverage right here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM, streaming live on Facebook as well as YouTube. Let them know. Stay in line. We've got Nico Cassis, Marie Eisenstein, Chris Nolte. I'm Tom Maloney. We'll go to break, and we'll be getting updated numbers from Michael Gallenberger coming up here in just a moment.
Our children deserve the best start in life, and you can make that possible. Lakeshore Public Media's Building Blocks initiative, focused on early childhood development, has received a boost. A $100,000 matching grant from the Legacy Foundation. Your donation will be doubled, empowering this vital work. Don't miss your chance to build our community's future. Visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks.
Hi, this is Steve Inskeep. When you roll out of bed, bleary-eyed and groggy, if you're like me, the first thing on your mind is getting something to wake you up. So turn on the radio. NPR's daily news program, Morning Edition, has been working through the night to get you the news you need. It's as essential to your morning as a good cup of coffee. So hit the ground running by listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tune in for Morning Edition from 4 to 9 a.m. with local news beginning at 6 here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM. You're on the go, and so are we. You can tune in anytime online at lakeshorepublicmedia.org, the NPR app, Apple Music, TuneIn, or your smart speaker. Are you curious about your baby's development? Want to discover what's really going on in your toddler's brain? Join Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhower of First Things First Porter County as she converses with local experts, parents, and practitioners about the building blocks for brain and language development. Tune in Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Lakeshore Public Media for Building Blocks, the podcast. And to find out more about Building Blocks, visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks.
It's 7:23. Good evening. I'm Michael Gallenberger. You're listening to live election coverage on Lakeshore Public Media. And we have early and absentee voting results from Lake County. According to these numbers, more than 100,000 people voted early or absentee in Lake County. That's more than 27% voter turnout of the registered voters. Looking at the results, the Lake Station school referendum especially close. 375 yes, 377 no. President and Vice President, Democrat Harris and Walz, 54,292. Republican Trump and Vance, 43,760. United States Senator Democrat Valerie McRae, 52,319. Republican Jim Banks, 41,041. Libertarian Andrew Horning, 999. Governor and Lieutenant Governor Democrat McCormick Gooden, 52,917. Republican Braun and Beckwith, 41,048. Libertarian Rainwater and Hudson, 1,182. Indiana Attorney General, Democrat Destiny Wells, 52,469. Republican Ted Rokita, 42,963. U.S. Representative District 1, Democrat Frank J. Mervan, 55,998. Republican Randy Niemeyer, 40,609. Libertarian Dakota Miskus, 885. State Senator District 2, Democrat Lonnie M. Randolph, 12,272. Republican Humberto Prado, 6,060. State Senator District 3, Democrat Mark Spencer, 15,349. Republican Will Miller, 5,160. State Representative District 2, Democrat Earl Harris Jr., 6,548. Republican Ben Ruiz, 1,049. State Representative District 3, Democrat Reagan Hatcher, 6,775. Republican Leslie A. Dahlner, 3,682. State Representative District 12, Democrat Mike Andrade, 9,458. Republican Jim Leitz, 6,904. State Representative District 14, Democrat Vernon G. Smith, 8,060. Republican Ivan Ursary II, 2,731. State Representative District 15, Democrat Jack Walter, 7,932. Republican Hal Slager, 11,735. Again, those are the early and absentee numbers from Lake County. For Lakeshore News, I'm Michael Gallenberger.
Thank you, Michael. And you are listening to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM. I'm Tom Maloney, joined alongside by Marie Eisenstein, Nico Cassis, and of course Lakeshore Public Media's Chris Nolte. And getting some of those early absentee numbers in, Frank Mervan leading by just about 6,000 early votes over Republican candidate nominee Randy Niemeyer. Niemeyer, of course, a well-known name here in Northwest Indiana politics. And I should note some news as well out of the statewide race. While the Associated Press has already called the governor's race in favor of Mike Braun, Tim Spears from down in Indianapolis from Wish TV tweets out, McCormick's team is not planning a concession speech yet. Quote, waiting to see how the next hour shakes out, end quote, and see how Hamilton, Marion, and Lake counties end up. So while AP has already called the race, Marie, we talked about it just moments ago, and of course wanting to make sure things are sort of buttoned up. But I can remember years ago, I believe it was 2012, and the networks had called Wisconsin for Mitt Romney very early on, and he had to pull it back within an hour because Barack Obama ended up winning the state. But the early exit poll data looked like Romney was going to do well, but as such, races aren't decided by the networks officially the night of. They are decided by actually totaling up those votes. So McCormick's team still waiting on those results here across Northwest Indiana. I know Michael is diligently hitting refresh on the Lake County updates for those numbers as well. As we get into the evening here, and of course we left off the conversation talking about an impact on the rain here in Northwest Indiana, a rainy election day, but those early voting numbers, and anecdotally, I heard from a lot of people who went to vote early, long lines all over Lake, Porter, LaPorte counties, and actually, that was a deterrent for me personally. I ended up getting my sticker today. I went in, as I so often do, and I vote the day of because it's tradition. And especially, I don't have an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours to wait around on a Saturday, or, an hour and a half to wait around on a Tuesday to vote for early voting when I could just, I could wing it and see what happens on Election Day. Early voting and the process of early voting.
They are different rules across the state. Heck, they are even different rules from Lake County to Porter County here in Northwest Indiana. Can we talk a little bit about the process of early voting? Of course, we saw reports, a couple of ballot boxes out west were lit on fire by individuals trying to burn those early ballots, they weren't fake news. They weren't AI-generated photos. They were actually burnt ballots. And so that process of early voting, vote by mail, and I guess the issues that we run into with it, Marie.
About like what impact this has, early voting?
Yeah, I guess in terms of early voting, is it important for a candidate to get all of their messaging out early as opposed to maybe later on?
You know what? That is the thing I've been thinking about now for probably the last 4 years in terms of early voting and what it does to the election cycle. Mm-hmm. Because candidates are crafting their messages. And if you go back, say, 20 years or even 25 years, and I think I was saying to Chris during the break, 25 years ago when I was getting my PhD, it was just so dramatically different, right, in American government. And election day, it was like a candidate didn't want to peak too soon before election day, right? So those last 7 days, you didn't want to peak at day 7 or day 6, maybe,
It's almost like running a race. Don't burn all your energy in the first lap.
Right, don't burn all your energy in the first lap. Well, when you have voting that can start, and every state can do it differently, but when you have now election month, right, election month, this really changes the dynamics of what campaigns should do, need to do, and I'm not a campaign expert, so I can't really speak to that, but this has to be almost a nightmare for them because there's information that can come out between the time of someone votes and election day that maybe it would have changed their mind of how they voted. Right, if this information was known beforehand. And so as a candidate in their campaign to have to try to plan for this, adjust for this, campaign for this is just a logistical nightmare, I think.
Does it kill the October surprise?
In some ways, it does, right? Because if you have 20%, 30% of people in electorate going out to early vote, I mean, that's taking a whole slew of votes off the table that might be swayed by that October surprise. So it doesn't mean that last minute information won't have any effect, but it's certainly diminished. It's certainly diminished because you just have so many people who want to take advantage of early voting. Mm-hmm. But it really has changed. I mean, I can remember being in graduate school and we were having, they seem so quaint now, discussions of how we should have, get a national holiday for voting or maybe have it over a weekend so that everyone would have an opportunity to vote. But we were not having discussions about early voting that took place 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead of time. So, I mean, when you think about it, that's 1/12 of the year.
Right.
Right.
Nico.
People going out to vote.
Yeah. Is the microphone working?
Maybe. I think we got some more. Maybe it is a connection.
I think it might be a little bit of a connection. Well,
yeah, let's slide that microphone over here. Maybe it's the cord itself as opposed to the actual microphone.
It could be the actual cord or anything. So, that's a really great point. And I think that kind of going back to the McCormick campaign is that I can totally understand why they are waiting on the concession speech because they worked tooth and nail on this campaign. I mean, they were trying to not make accidental history by having Republican rule in the state for since 2000, since the past 20-year mark. So I can totally understand why they want to wait and before making a concession speech because their foot soldiers, I've been watching the campaign really closely and they've just been doing some really, really hard work. So it's why give it up now? And I know that the campaign in terms was really, really interesting on how Mike Braun, how he, the House, the House Enrolled Act 1133 were regarding with deep fakes and political ads, and that was passed actually in May of 2024, early this year. He violated that law because of the deep fake AI ad that he had on the attack ad that he had on, at least his super PACted against Jennifer McCormick.
Which got airtime. It ran across the state for a number of days before being flagged as AI. At that point, it's
it's like going to the jury and say, please strike that from the record. Okay, you can't officially use that in your deliberation after the case is over, but you've already heard the information. As a human, it's tough to take that out of your conscience, right? In terms of, or your subconscious, in terms of how you ultimately decide truth from not truth, or truth from fiction, capital T versus lowercase t truth. A couple of days of airtime for that ad to get out there and run before somebody says, wait a minute, that's not real. It has an impact.
And you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's already out. People have already seen it. And for those of the listeners who don't remember or don't know, is that with the ad, it's talking about they had Jennifer McCormick supporters having poster boards on an attack ad saying no gas stoves. Well, there is nothing on Jennifer McCormick's platform that has anything to do with gas stoves. So that was just particularly wild. So that did get a little bit dirty on that side. But McCormick, very professional, even during debates, was just being very stoic, very professional. And so and she put her heart and soul into this campaign. So I can, if she wants to wait for a concession speech, we should all give her grace. And I completely understand that.
Yeah, there's no point in, you've got all night and you've got into tomorrow before you have to really get into it. And who knows, maybe numbers in Hamilton County, Marion County, Lake County become close enough. Chris, you were talking about wanting to see some of those returns on those numbers. And again, earlier in the evening here, Congressman Jim Banks has issued the following statement after his landslide victory in Indiana's U.S. Senate race. Quote, I am grateful for the support of my family and the support I've had from Hoosiers across the state. I owe this victory to all who contributed to it. Only in America can a kid like me, who grew up in a trailer park in Columbia City and was the first in my family to go to college, go on to become a United States Senator. As your next senator, I will fight every day to protect that American dream for the next generation. Well, if you've noticed, I put on my Steve Kornicki uniform. I've taken off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, right? Let's talk about the imagery of the campaign and those candidates who roll up the sleeves. They're not wearing a jacket. They're in the classroom. They're in they're in McDonald's with you, right? Frying some chicken nuggets and some French fries. They are there with you because they are just like you. Maybe Maria and Nico will have you guys slide a little bit closer here for the microphone's sake. But you talk about that and candidates running on the hope of the American dream. And of course, we talk about that in the midst of the dying of the middle class and the impact that has in terms of pocketbooks are tighter. Groceries cost more money. Gas costs more money. Everything costs more money. And so this American dream, in terms of a candidate selling it, how does that impact, or how do people view that now? Chris, I guess we'll go to you first in terms of what you've seen in reporting, what you've been reporting on throughout the course of the campaign, and sort of the rhetoric and how candidates display themselves.
I've noticed in particular, and this goes to not only the discussions, but also to the advertising. With Marie mentioning the fact that we've because of early voting, we're starting so much earlier, literally, than what we've had before. That means you've got to have a chance on television programs to see all of the commercials, and in particular, not only the commercials trying to fight Mike Braun,
right,
but also the commercials about Frank Mervan and
Randy Niemeyer, of course, he's in his truck.
In particular, that's part of the Niemeyer pictures in one of his milk trucks.
Yep.
But also the commercials that we're running for Mervan, following along with his basic theme of what he's done and what he wants to do if reelected. But following through, I guess, in one particular commercial about the atmosphere in Congress. Mm-hmm. The MAGA atmosphere in Congress, and in particular what that has meant, I guess, to try to for a re-election bid. We'll have to find out. We see he's doing well so far. Certainly in Lake County.
Those early numbers coming in.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how things are going to shape up as far as what the not only the advertising, early advertising, because the fact we've got to see a whole month, basically, of commercials, if you watched enough television or heard enough commercials, whichever, if you happen to be out of the
Right.
side of the TV at the time. But also, in turn, it's also, as you say, the images that the candidates have put on. And in particular, thinking about the rolling up the sleeves type of image, we hadn't seen in that particular race, in the Frank Brevin and Niemeyer race.
Right.
We haven't seen that as much. But the
fighting for the candidate, the rhetoric is there.
Yeah, the rhetoric is still there.
And of course, it's really easy to superimpose yourself, as we've seen Elon Musk do repeatedly on his X platform, a platform where we'll get into it here probably coming out of the break, Nico, and discussing the rise of fake news, fake imagery, and sort of just how quickly lies get out there before the truth even gets its pants on. But we'll be getting to that here after the break, as well as a conversation with Kirsten Adair from IPB News to discuss school referendums and the impacts they have on local elections, and what does it mean for schools to win in those referendums or ultimately lose, as we saw last election cycle at the local level. You are listening to live election night coverage with Nico Cassis, Marie Eisenstein, Chris Nolte, myself, Tom Maloney, streaming live on lakeshorepublicmedia.org, on the web stream, as well as on Facebook and YouTube, as well as the old-fashioned way, 89.1 FM.
Hi, this is Steve Inskeep. When you roll out of bed, bleary-eyed and groggy, if you're like me, the first thing on your mind is getting something to wake you up. So turn on the radio. NPR's daily news program, Morning Edition, has been working through the night to get you the news you need. It's as essential to your morning as a good cup of coffee. So hit the ground running by listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tune in for Morning Edition from 4 to 9 a.m. with local news beginning at 6 here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM.
Help Lakeshore Public Media strengthen our community's future with Building Blocks, a multimedia initiative focused on early childhood development through TV, radio, podcasts, and community events. We work to provide essential resources to families. Thanks to a matching grant from our Legacy Foundation, your donation can have double the impact. Match dollar for dollar up to $100,000. Invest in our children's future by visiting lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks today.
Each week, Regionally Speaking takes on the biggest stories from across Northwest Indiana and digs deeper. Whether it's the latest news from the Statehouse in Indianapolis or a deep dive into the region's past, hosts Dee Dodson and Tom Maloney explore everything happening in Northwest Indiana. Tune in for Regionally Speaking, Fridays at 11 a.m. here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM. Streaming online at lakeshorepublicmedia.org, your smart speaker, or wherever you find your podcasts. Are you curious about your baby's development? Want to discover what's really going on in your toddler's brain? Join Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhower of First Things First Porter County as she converses with local experts, parents, and practitioners about the building blocks for brain and language development. Tune in Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Lakeshore Public Media for Building Blocks, the podcast. And to find out more about Building Blocks, visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks. Welcome back to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM. I'm Tom Maloney. He's Nico Cassis. Got it? Yes. Marie Eisenstein, Associate Political Professor at IUN. And Lakeshore Public Media's Chris Nolte. Joining us on the phone line now from Indianapolis is Kirsten Adair. Kirsten, happy election night. How are you? Oh, Kirsten, do we have you? Oh, we seem to have some technical difficulties here for Kirsten. Okay, we'll hold that thought before we can get to her to talk some school referendums. Marie, you wanted to jump in on the conversation with regards to that American dream and the concept of a kid growing up in a trailer park to a politician rolling up his sleeves and getting down and dirty with him.
Yeah, I mean, clearly. Is this on? There we go.
There we go.
All right. Clearly, candidates, there are any number of candidates, right, throughout history who have this story. But what I'm always struck by, and I teach this course about the development of American political thought, is how so much of our identity of what we are as a nation is woven into the fabric of our history. So one of the things that I have our students read, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to say his name right, even though I assigned the book, it's like from John de Quevecoeur. And it's a book called "A Letter from the American from an American Farmer," and it was written right around the time of the American Revolution.
Okay.
And so this is a French immigrant who came to America, and he's writing back all these letters to different outlets in Europe and in France, saying you can be and do anything you want to do here. And as you read these letters, this concept of the American dream, that you can come from someplace else or come from nowhere or not have much of a background and build yourself up. And so when I hear these stories in modern day America, in my mind, I always tie them back to this long history that in this country, this dream dies so hard.
Right.
Because you're talking about we have this diminishing middle class, but yet most Americans, we are very much tied to this notion of you can be and do anything you want in America. And again, there's clearly many people who have, but it isn't just a modern thing. It's something that is woven. It's a thread throughout our history. It's in our national DNA that this is what we are as a country, that this is who we are as a people. So I think that this is one of the reasons why these stories resonate so much with Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, we're taught it. It's almost like in our DNA.
Yeah, if you're born in America, anything can happen, and
Right.
and it's always a positive that anything can happen as opposed to a negative.
Oh, right. It's evolution, not devolution.
That's right. Let's try one more time. Let's see if Kirsten is there. Kirsten, can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hey, we can. Good evening. How are you?
Perfect. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing?
Hey, we're doing well. I know that you are keeping an eye on those school referendums from across the state, and of course, voters up here in Northwest Indiana. It's rare, but we only have one this time around, and that is out of Lake Station, Edison, and school referendum there. But I wanted to get you on for just a few moments to just talk about school referendums. What do they mean for local communities in terms of raising of tax dollars, increased property values, but also at the same time, increased budgets for schools and better opportunities for students abroad? What does a school referendum mean on a ballot for a local community?
Yeah, a school referendum is really a school just asking the community to contribute a little bit more to students' education, whether it is to pay teachers more, implement more programs, or different sorts of activities for kids, or in Lake Station's case, a lot of this money will go toward transportation costs if the referendum is approved.
So transportation costs in terms of busing, or
Yeah.
Okay. So looking at opportunities there for kids to even get to school, and what that means. We are probably past the point of having a referendum on a ballot measure, meaning it's going to just be outright passed, right? I mean, I think those days are behind us now, and folks are really taking a hard look in terms of, does this school system really need these extra dollars? Has that been the case across the Hoosier state?
Yeah. So actually, Representative Ed Delaney held a press conference a few weeks ago in which he was discussing school funding. And he said a lot of lawmakers are likely in agreement that schools shouldn't rely on referendums nearly as much for that additional funding. However, making up for that funding is going to be a question of really how lawmakers want to address it. Less than half of schools in the state have asked for referendums, but those that do really depend on that funding. They say, they use it for a lot of different reasons, but ultimately it's to make up for gaps in what they're receiving from the taxes.
So some of those gaps as well. What kind of an impact does school choice vouchers now have on schools and needing to go the referendum route to help make up the gap?
There's a lot of debate about the role that vouchers play in school funding, but a lot of Democratic lawmakers say that vouchers take money away from schools overall. They kind of separate money into a different pot, and less of that money goes toward public schools, whereas a lot of Republican lawmakers say if those schools are doing well and are successful, then, kids will choose to go there and their enrollment will be stable and they won't have as much issue with the funding. So I think we're going to see a lot of debate on this upcoming session about exactly what role vouchers play in school funding and how lawmakers want to maybe address some of those concerns.
We're talking with Kirsten Adair, state education reporter at Indiana Public Broadcasting, better known as IPB News here across the state. Kirsten, have we gotten any results yet from any referendums from across the rest of the state? And if so, how have they done?
So far, we're still waiting. We have some preliminary results from Lake County, and so far it looks like it's going to be pretty close.
Okay, well, we'll have to keep an eye on that. And, of course, I do recall the last election cycle, the locals, the municipals last year, in which I think we had 7 on the ballot, and they all came back in losing fashion, and it was quite devastating for school systems across Northwest Indiana. And many are still seeing and or feeling the ramifications of those failed school referendums. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on Lake Station for the remainder of the evening in that. Kirsten, thank you so much for carving out a few minutes of your pizza eating time here on election night to go ahead and join us and talk school referendums.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom.
All right, thank you. That was Kirsten Adair, state education reporter here for IPB News, talking school referendums across the Hoosier state. And again, it's something that it's interesting in terms of how we view the ballot now, right? It's no longer just checking a box for a candidate. The first question on the ballot this election season was to determine whether or not the State Secretary of Education should then be third in line for the governorship. Should the governor and lieutenant governor not be able to perform their duties? Should something tragic happen, right? And that's on there. And then it's school referendums are on there and all of these other questions. And, then you get into it and it's like, okay, well, I know who I want to vote here and I know who I want to vote for that race and that race. But wait, then there's judges and then there's these other questions. And there's a lot of stuff on there, Marie, that if you don't do your homework, you don't necessarily know what's going to be on the test.
Oh my goodness, this is so true. I mean, I think to myself that it's so often, I hear this maybe in class, I hear this from friends, from colleagues, where people will bemoan like, oh, we don't have an educated enough public, like for voting. And there is a point at which I don't know that anybody can be as educated as you may need to be. When you walk into the voting booth and all of a sudden you're looking at judges and you're like, I don't know who these people are. Like, I don't know who they are, and I'm not sure that we should necessarily be voting for who sits on the bench. I'm not saying we shouldn't. It's just a real issue that I think we need to discuss in terms of like, how do we put judges on the bench locally? And it would take a lot of work for an individual at the local level to figure out information on the judges.
It would, because it's not readily available.
It's not readily available. It's not like the federal office. It's not like the statewide offices where you're having campaign information come your way or things show up on your social media streams. You're not seeing this about the local judges. So I always feel bad for these people. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, their jobs are at the mercy of people who don't know who they are and are being asked to vote for them.
And I'll be honest, Chris, I don't know, between you and me, I feel like sometimes when it comes to local elections, we're two of the smartest people in the room. I got a hard time figuring that out. I know in the past you've talked to judges and you've had those conversations with them. Do they like that process of being put on the ballot and letting the uninformed or maybe undereducated voter make a decision for their future?
Well, I know over the years, and this depends on the person, the judge you talk to, most seem to kind of accept it as a fact of life. And that's that the retention question is going to be on the ballot, and it's going to be there. And the only time it changes is when for some reason a judge passes away, and the governor has to make a decision and has to rely on the Judicial Commission for help in finding enough candidates to make a choice. So I think in that respect, the judicial candidates themselves and the judges, or the judges up for retention, are pretty much kind of resigned to the fact this is the way the system is, and they've tried to tweak it enough, and there have been debates even here in Lake County about that, and a lot of discussion about whether a judge should be selected by that method, and it's still not been completely worked out.
And I should note the Associated Press has called the race for State Attorney General Todd Rokita. The incumbent has come away with the victory tonight over Destiny Scott Wells. So, again, the Associated Press calling the race in favor of Todd Rokita, a Northwest Indiana native, now retaining, I believe, his second term in office as Indiana's Attorney General. Nico, you wanted to jump in on that conversation there?
Yeah, the Todd Rokita race was the Attorney General race was especially interesting because this really gained a lot of national attention, especially with the abortion ban and a lot of, and just him being extremely active on social media. Again, that was also a really great campaign that was done by Wells, but I guess it just didn't pan out for that race. So, kind of going back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier. Regarding, oh my God, what were we talking about earlier? I don't.
The American Dream.
The American Dream aspect is that because I think that's such a really, really great question, because it's just like everyone wants to know that politician's story. I mean, and not only that with if you have a great story, but are you local? Are you a true Hoosier? We kind of saw that with the previous Senate race with Pennsylvania with John Fetterman against Dr. Oz, whose residence was in New Jersey, and and he was like a homegrown citizen of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But are you running for office? Are you coming from Chicago? God forbid. Are you coming from Michigan? Are you coming from Ohio? How long have you been in Indiana? So not only about like the actual narrative of your story, but like how, I guess you could say, how Hoosier are you? And how much of an Indiana? And
on that note, I should mention Evan Bayh, former Indiana governor, beloved Indiana governor, beloved U.S. senator, steps down, stays in D.C., works for a think tank or some political organization, and Dems attempted to kind of shoehorn him back into the race a few years ago. And Hoosiers said, absolutely not. You're not one of us anymore. And it almost gets to the point of that no true Scotsman fallacy where, at what point is that line in terms of who is a true Hoosier? I was not born here. I was not really raised here. I moved here in 1999, I believe. But now I've lived here for the better part of almost 25 years. I am a Hoosier. I live in Northwest Indiana. I'm not moving. I'll be buried in Northwest Indiana. But it's almost that argument of like, where is the region? Is it the old region used to be north of 8094 and west of I-65, and then it became north of Route 30 and west of I-65. Now it's just north of 30. Now it's, well, if you're in like the Lake Porter, LaPorte County region, you're in the region, right? So that whole sort of, I don't want to call it a fallacy, but that goalpost does get moved in terms of when it is beneficial for somebody to claim that I'm a hardworking Hoosier just like you, and they throw on the accent, they roll up those sleeves, living the American dream. And when I think for a lot of individuals, you want to be able to place yourself in the footsteps or in so to speak, in terms of how that politician is, and say, you know what, I couldn't do it, but he can, and he can do it because of me, or she can do it because of my support. And so trying to get those voters to really buy in. And I know we have just a few minutes here before the break, but the sort of the team aspect of the rah, 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 where you've got the Trump banners up, the Trump flags up, You've got the Harris flags or the Biden
or the garbage man uniform.
The garbage man uniform
that Todd Rokita had was very, very active on X. It showed him with the garbage man uniform. Showing that we're part of this tribe. So his base really did turn out in this state of Indiana for when he won that race. So with the attorney general. So that one I'm actually a little bit surprised at, because I really thought the abortion issue. I really thought just with the Republican rule. But yeah, it looks like it's just what do you call it, a hat trick? So with the governor, with the senator, and with the attorney general now. So yeah.
It certainly is, and we'll be getting into more of that coming up here in the next hour, along with more updates from Michael Gallenberger still to come throughout the course of the evening as they do get posted, and several races already called here in the Hoosier state, including Mike Braun, victorious tonight in his governor's race. Jim Banks, victorious in his U.S. Senate race to take over for Mike Braun. Donald Trump collecting 11 Electoral College votes here in the Hoosier state. And now Todd Rokita, victorious in his Attorney General's race here in the state of Indiana. You're listening to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM, streaming online at lakeshorepublicmedia.org, as well as on Facebook, YouTube, and our app. Search for Lakeshore Public Media wherever you get apps in your app store. We'll throw it to the break here, and then we'll come back. We'll have NPR News coming up in just a few minutes. And again, next hour, we'll be getting more updates from Michael Gallenberger. You're listening to live election night coverage right here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM.
Give every family in our community the building blocks for success with Lakeshore Public Media's Building Blocks Multimedia Initiative. Focused on early childhood development, this project empowers families with accessible and credible resources. And now, your donation will be doubled dollar for dollar, up to $100,000, thanks to the Legacy Foundation. Make a difference that lasts. Visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks and support this life-enhancing initiative today.
Want to discover what's really going on in your toddler's brain? Join Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhower of First Things First Porter County as she converses with local experts, parents, and practitioners about the building blocks for brain and language development. Tune in Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Lakeshore Public Media for Building Blocks, the podcast.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. As polls close in Arizona and Michigan and Wisconsin with their combined 36 electoral votes, it is shaping up to be a long night. NPR's national political correspondent Sarah McCammon joins me now. Sarah, you've been keeping a close eye on voters who supported Nikki Haley in the Republican primaries. Vice President Harris has tried to win over many of those Republican voters. What have you heard from them?
Right. Conservative-leaning voters who are uncomfortable with Donald Trump have been a key part of the Harris campaign strategy. And supporters of former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley have been a big focus of that effort. I covered that campaign. Many said they were voting for Haley because they didn't want Trump to be the nominee. And even after she dropped out of the Republican primary, she still got double-digit support in several states, including places like Pennsylvania, which is, of course, a swing state. She got 160,000 votes almost there in a state that Biden won by about 80,000 votes in 2020, which just illustrates the significance of that group. Now, there isn't a lot of polling of this group, but a couple of recent polls have suggested that even though Haley herself has endorsed Trump, Harris may be making some progress with these types of voters.
This is the first presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. There are 11 abortion-related ballot measures across the country.
Yeah. In the past 2 years since the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision overturning Roe, abortion rights advocates have seen a lot of success with ballot measures. Each time a question related to abortion has been put directly to voters, voters have signaled support for abortion access. And tonight there are 11 measures in 10 states. That's because Nebraska has two competing measures on the ballot, one that would essentially protect abortion rights and another that would restrict abortion. A couple of other key states to watch include Arizona, which is also a critical presidential state, and also Missouri, where abortion is currently illegal in almost all cases. Last year, voters in Ohio were able to overturn abortion restrictions in that state through a constitutional amendment that they passed on the ballot, just to illustrate, what these ballot initiatives can do.
NPR's Sarah McCammon. Thanks, Sarah. A lot of ice tonight, meanwhile, in the so-called 7 swing states. They include the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. NPR's Don Garney says all the math here is important.
Democrats need those 3 states as a part of their best kind of coalition, their best path to capture the White House. If they lose one of those, they got to pick it up somewhere else, and that gets complicated, that gets harder.
We may have results in Michigan sooner than in some past presidential contests. All 3 of the blue wall states are still too close to call. Meanwhile, North Carolina Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein has won the state's race for governor. That's according to a race call by the Associated Press. Stein defeating Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. You're listening to NPR News in Washington. Voters across the nation are going to decide the composition of both the Senate and House. Democrats are mostly playing defense in the Senate, where they hold a very slim majority. Republicans need a net gain of just 2 seats for outright control. Democrats defending 23 seats in the Senate compared to just 11 for Republicans. Democrats need to win more of those toss-up seats to tip the balance in their favor. Vice President Harris will be tracking the results tonight in an election watch party at her alma mater, Howard University in Washington. If she wins, she would make history as the first U.S. president to graduate from a historically black college university. As NPR's Deepa Shivaram reports, Harris called into an Atlanta radio show this morning to talk about what the school means to her.
Harris often talks about the impact Howard had on her identity and her desire to become a lawyer. Howard is where she pledged her sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, and as she told the Big Tigger Morning Show, it's where she ran her first campaign as freshman class rep.
To go back tonight to Howard University, my beloved alma mater, and be able to hopefully, recognize this day for what it is really, it's full circle for me.
Former President Trump is spending election night with family and friends in West Palm Beach, Florida. Deepa Shivaram, NPR News, Washington.
Rafael is now a hurricane as it moves through the southern Caribbean. The Category 1 storm has maximum sustained winds of 75 miles an hour and is currently approaching the Cayman Islands. It will be near or over western Cuba tomorrow, then move into the Gulf of Mexico by tomorrow night. Meteorologists caution it's too soon to determine what impacts it may have in the northern Gulf. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at rwjf.org.
Well, I hope your coffee pot is full and your pizza is still warm here on election night. Good evening. I'm Tom Maloney. Joining me live in studio tonight is Lakeshore Public Media's Chris Nolte, as well as Nico Cassis, Assistant Librarian for Teaching and Learning at Indiana University Northwest, as well as Marie Eisenstein, Associate Professor of Political Science at Indiana University Northwest. Good evening to everyone here.
Good evening.
We've had some preliminary results in already. Again, everything unofficial, but the Associated Press has called the races for Mike Braun for our next governor. Jim Banks becomes our next U.S. Senator, and Todd Rokita remains the Attorney General here in Indiana. And Donald Trump has once again won the Hoosier state for the 3rd straight election cycle, collecting those 11 electoral college votes at the national level, 270 to win, right? We all know the map. We've all been clicking on different colors and different, what happens if this happens, or what happens if this polling data pulls through. And we left off the conversation here last hour talking about tribes and teamwork and sort of, putting on a banner or a hat or a T-shirt, not even just attending a political rally, but really embracing the candidate. With the rise of Donald Trump and MAGA politics, we've seen, I think, more tribalism when it comes to politics than I think we've seen in a long time. A lot of folks wearing red hats, a lot of folks, with bumper stickers and flags on their cars and on their trucks. What does that mean in terms of politics moving forward when it's seen more along the lines of a team sport, or my side won or my side's doing this, versus these are people who work for us, the American public, right? So how does that discourse really change? I've left everybody speechless.
Yeah. Well, we've certainly seen this rise, right, in candidate-centered elections. But this has been going on a long time. Like, Donald Trump didn't create the phenomenon, right? He is, like, the latest manifestation.
Yeah, the incarnation of the next candidate doing it. Yeah.
Of the next candidate doing it. And so, I mean, and all these things, like, tied together, because there was a time in history where we had more party-centered elections, but now we have more candidate-centered elections where it's this cult of personality. And I mean, and there's in some ways I get it, in the sense of okay, you want some person that you can resonate with. We have two major parties that vacillate in power, so that quote-unquote big tent, it's a binary choice. This isn't a parliamentary system, so you're not going to be able to just get that narrow focus of that one party that can really hone in on 90% of everything you agree with. You're just not going to get this in the system. So I like to tell my students these days that focus on the policy. And I'm not saying that people necessarily do that, but focus on the policies instead of the person. So what policies are most important to you? And I say what policies just because I'm not one of these people who think that you can necessarily find any set of policies from one political party that you're going to agree with 100%. And then this is where we get into issues, different, like the abortion issue. Because some people will have one issue that will drive like who they end up voting, who they end up voting for. It would be nice if there was more than one issue, but I think this is sometimes what we get. So we've had this increasing candidate-centered elections away from party-centered elections. If we could focus more on policies that we like versus ones that we don't, if we could, move past just one divisive policy, that would be lovely. I don't know that we will. But there's certainly, all of this is certainly culminated in this, instead of viewing the other side as our opponents, they're viewed as our enemy, which is really problematic because I don't know about anybody else's household, so I'll make it anecdotal.
Yeah.
But I can't go to a family gathering without people on different sides of Trump, not Trump. And it's been this way since 2015. And I come from a long line of blue-collar Teamster union workers.
Right.
So the fights are brutal. So
and they're personal. They know each other.
And they're personal, and they know each other. And I don't think it's just playing out at my family gatherings. I think these are things that are playing out at other family gatherings. And I think that what I see happen in my own family, where each side is calling the other side un-American. You are un-American.
It rings true of McCarthyism in the 50s and 60s, right? Everybody's a spy for the Soviets.
And this is taking place, I think, across the country. And this sort of goes back to it. In my mind, it ties in. I probably didn't make that clear when I talk about we really need to develop a system where we know who won, in a reasonable amount of time. It would be nice having election day comes and goes. By the next day, we know, because we're in such a divisive era that any appearance of impropriety, even if there isn't any, it's like, oh, well, yes, you needed another 4 days to stuff the ballot box.
Right.
That's why we need those. That's why we don't know.
That delay, yeah.
Right. So I just think that on a national level, it's not good for our polarization. So I don't have any great answers as to how to bring us back from the brink, but I think that we've been actually flying towards this brink since probably the 1980s. Since Ronald Reagan and his presidency, we went from him. I know we had people call his third term with George H.W. Bush, but by the time we got to Bill Clinton, I feel like as if the national divide just became stronger and stronger and stronger. And the polarization just became greater from there on out.
Especially with Newt Gingrich's contract with America, he was having that polarizing rhetoric and everything.
Right.
I mean, it kind of started with the mid-'90s with Newt Gingrich. So, yeah, I mean, this is, and I wish that, I'm so happy that you tell your students, look at the policies. Well, the average voter, they don't. I mean, they look at who they, vote for, who they want to have a beer with, who they want to game with and everything. So, and it's just like, but your average voter, what they're calling this right now, like all over with social media and the media, is they're calling it the vibe election.
Right.
Not necessarily like on policy, but like who do you think I'm comfortable with watching on TV every day? Who am I comfortable seeing on TikTok all the time? And I really do wish people would take a look at the policies, but it's not sexy and it's not exciting to people with that. I just want to say in terms of with the tribe conversation is taking a look at just how divided Gen Z is when voting by gender. It's just amazing. You have young Gen Z men who are overwhelmingly voting for Trump, and then you have young Gen Z women who are overwhelmingly voting for Harris. And you can see on what tools that the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign are using. You see Trump, going on Joe Rogan, going on these gamers, going on Twitch and everything like that. And then you see Kamala Harris, with being endorsed by Taylor Swift and with Beyonce and with
she was on Call Her Daddy, right?
Yeah, and on the podcast Call Her Daddy, which is the most popular podcast for women under 35. Yep. I believe it is. And so just going on those platforms, and it's I don't think I've ever, I haven't been looking at politics for that long, but it's just like Gen Z in particular, just that divide is so sharp. I mean, if you just ask like any Gen Z woman, or if you ask any Gen Z man, is this true? Does this reflect on your life? Does this reflect at, when you're going out with friends? And they'll probably say yes.
And we'll hold that point of the conversation for just a moment. But joining us now is State Senator-elect from District 3, Mark Spencer, victorious tonight over Republican challenger Will Miller out of Gary. Mark, are you there?
I'm here. Good evening, everyone.
Hey, good evening and congratulations. And you, of course, victorious in a hotly contested Democratic primary against Dave Van Zandt. And I would be remiss if I didn't include the fact that we had you on the debate stage and talking about your policies. Mark, what are your plans here moving forward as you are victorious in your state Senate race?
Well, folks, first of all, folks, thank you for having me on this evening. Basically, I plan to follow through with what I've actually discussed and shared with all in District 3. I want to listen very carefully to the needs and the desires of those who reside in those 5 cities and towns. It's extremely important that they have the representation they deserve. And as I learn more of their priorities, it actually fuels me and gives me what I need as I learn and navigate that very quick environment of the Statehouse, how we can bring goods and resources back to our region. And I just want to thank all from those cities, of course, Gary, Hobart Lake Station, New Chicago, and Maryville, who have been just quite candid with me as to what their needs have been. And as I continue to learn, that's what I want to primarily do. I just want to represent them more than adequately. I want to do it in honor.
Speaking of learning, you are a teacher, correct?
I am.
Do you have plans to continue teaching while serving down at the State House, or what are the plans there?
Sure. It's just we've been actually planning, not being proactive in the event that this day would occur the way it has actually turned out. We are going to, and I'm not in the classroom, I'm an administrator with a teaching license. So what I will be doing, I will be working during the session just one day a week, maintaining intact with the corporation and working over the weekends to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And when the session's out, continue with my work on a regular basis, May through December.
It sounds like you've got it all mapped out. Mark, congratulations on your victory tonight, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you coming out of the State House and, of course, across Northwest Indiana.
Folks, thank you so much for the opportunity, and to the constituents, to the voters, thank you so much. It means a lot. It means everything. Thank you.
Thank you, and make sure that guitar is tuned up, all right?
I certainly will. Thank you. Have a great night.
All right, good deal. Thank you, Mark, and again, congratulations. We're going to go ahead and throw it to break. Coming out of the break here, we'll have the latest on the numbers from Michael Gallenberger, and the first batch of Lake County numbers are available. We'll be getting to those here after the break. You're listening to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM.
Give every family in our community the building blocks for success with Lakeshore Public Media's Building Blocks Multimedia Initiative. Focused on early childhood development, this project empowers families with accessible and credible resources. And now, your donation will be doubled dollar for dollar, up to $100,000, thanks to the Legacy Foundation. Make a difference that lasts. Visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks and support this life-enhancing initiative today.
Hi, this is Steve Inskeep. When you roll out of bed, bleary-eyed and groggy, if you're like me, the first thing on your mind is getting something to wake you up. So turn on the radio. NPR's daily news program, Morning Edition, has been working through the night to get you the news you need. It's as essential to your morning as a good cup of coffee. So hit the ground running by listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tune in for Morning Edition from 4 to 9 a.m. with local news beginning at 6 here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM. There are more ways to listen to Lakeshore Public Radio than just 89.1 FM. You can get Lakeshore Public Radio on the go at your convenience with the NPR app. NPR delivers breaking national and world news. On the app, you'll also get the top stories from business, politics, health, science, technology, music, arts, and culture. Come read and listen to the latest from Lakeshore Public Radio and NPR on the NPR app. The free app is available via iTunes, Google Play, and Windows app stores. When you download the NPR app, select Lakeshore Public Radio as your local station and get the latest news on the go, wherever you go. Baby's development? Want to discover what's really going on in your toddler's brain? Join Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhower of First Things First Porter County as she converses with local experts, parents, and practitioners about the building blocks for brain and language development. Tune in Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Lakeshore Public Media for Building Blocks, the podcast. And to find out more about Building Blocks, visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks.
It's 8:21. You're listening to live election coverage on Lakeshore Public Media. I'm Michael Gallenberger. And now the first batch of numbers from Porter County has come in. Again, these are numbers specific to Porter County. For President and Vice President, Republican Trump and Vance, 5,948. Democrat Harris and Walz, 3,323. U.S. Senator, Republican Jim Banks, 5,939. Democrat Valerie McRae, 3,267. Libertarian Andrew Horning, 320. Governor and Lieutenant Governor, Republicans Braun and Beckwith, 5,587. Democrat McCormick and Gooden, 3,598. Libertarian Rainwater and Hudson, 438. Indiana Attorney General, Republican Todd Rokita, 6,147. Democrat Destiny Wells, 3,365. U.S. Representative District 1, Republican Randy Niemeyer, 5,537. Democrat Frank J. Mervan, 3,815. Libertarian Dakota Miskus, 241. State Senator District 5, Republican Ed Charbonneau, 4,055. Democrat Leslie Nuss Bamesberger, 2,045. State Representative District 4, Republican Ed Soliday, 3,682. Democrat Erica Robinson Watkins, 2,080. State Representative District 9, Republican Joel Florek, 1,428. Democrat Pat Boy, 835. State Representative District 10, Republican Jeff Larson, 725. Democrat Chuck Mosley, 460. And again, those are the first batch of numbers from Porter County. Those numbers are specific to Porter County. Turning now to updated numbers from Lake County. For the Lake Station School referendum, yes, 1,176, no, 810. President and Vice President, Democrat Harris and Walz, 69,523. Republican Trump and Vance, 62,065. United States Senate Democrat Valerie McRae, 67,101. Republican Jim Banks, 57,419. Libertarian Andrew Horning, 1,841. Governor and Lieutenant Governor, Democrat McCormick and Gooden, 68,243. Republican Braun and Beckwith, 57,244. Libertarian Donald Rainwater, 2,153. Attorney General for Indiana, Democrat Destiny Wells, 67,489. Republican Todd Rokita, 60,298. U.S. Representative District 1, Democrat Frank J. Mervan, 72,731. Republican Randy Niemeyer, 56,658. Libertarian Dakota Miskus, 1,541. State Senator District 2, Democrat Lonnie M. Randolph, 12,409. Republican Humberto Prado, 6,086. State Senator District 3, Democrat Mark Spencer, 21,498. Republican Will Miller, 8,864. State Representative District 2, Democrat Earl Harris Jr., 6,908. Republican Ben Ruiz, 1,093. State Representative District 3, Democrat Reagan Hatcher, 99,300. Republican Leslie A. Dahlner, 6,310. State Representative District 12, Democrat Mike Andrade, 9,550. Republican Jim Leitz, 7,031. State Representative District 14, Democrat Vernon G. Smith, 13,818. Republican Ivan Ursary II, 5,311. State Representative District 15, Democrat Jack Walter, 10,228. Republican Hal Slager, 16,492. And again, those are the numbers specific to Lake County with 73 precincts and early votes reporting currently. For Lakeshore News, I'm Michael Gallenberger.
All right, welcome back to live election night coverage here on listener-supported Lakeshore Public Media, where you can make a pledge of support at lakeshorepublicmedia.org/give. It doesn't have to be a pledge drive for you to make a pledge of support. Good Tuesday evening. It is election night here in Northwest Indiana, along with the rest of the world. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of countries across the globe this evening who are voting on new leaders and rulers and presidents and senators and congresspeople and parliaments and everything else that you can call it under the sun. And right here in America, we have our own hot race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Should Harris be victorious in this race, she'd be the first woman elected to the office of president. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, should he win, would be the first candidate since Grover Cleveland to serve non-consecutive terms. So going all the way back into the 1800s for that little piece of information there. It's always amazing the weird statistics that come out of these races. It's almost like watching a Super Bowl, and it's like, well, this guy hasn't scored a touchdown anytime he's wearing this colored jersey, and it just gets kind of weird in that regard. We've seen some weirdness At the national level here, for those of you listening who may not have heard, but several bomb threats being called into Fulton County, Georgia throughout the course of the evening. Phone numbers being traced to Russian troll farms. And so the impact there, and Nico, this is something I want to dig in with you, is we first saw that rise of bots on Twitter back in 2015, 2016, and it was the first time that I think a lot of Americans got a heavy dose of misinformation with regards to our own electoral process. Lots of countries outside of America would say, yeah, we're used to this because of you guys, but for Americans, we're like, wait a minute, what's happening here? What happened in 2015, 2016 to really help set the stage for where we are now in terms of misinformation, in terms of AI, in terms of all of these things that aren't just Photoshop and clever edits?
Yeah, kind of going back to with 2016, yeah, it was bots back in the day. It was replicated accounts. It was just social media accounts that were just being created, that were just being spewed and everything like that. Now, fast forward over to 2024. Now, it's not bots anymore. Now, countries, such as like Russia and Iran, what they are actually doing is they're actually getting a hold of activists, both on the far left and the far right, in terms of with going it that way. So actually using real people, using real like identifiable social media accounts and websites and YouTube channels.
Is that the Tim Pool situation?
Yeah,
he's a pretty popular, pretty famous online right-wing, I guess, activist troll influencer who, as it turns out, was being paid. By Russia.
He became I guess you could say he became one of Russia's useful idiots, where he was taking money, but he didn't know where the money was necessarily coming from, but that he was just being paid to create this content that was pro-Trump content. And I was actually also reading about earlier is that Iran is actually taking notes from Russia as well too, and that's because of Trump being so anti-Iran. So what they're trying to do is they're actually trying to boost the Harris campaign, not at the same sophistication as that what Russia's doing for Trump, but they're still doing it nonetheless. So bots, doesn't happen anymore. It's way too easy to sniff that out. But what they're doing is they're taking a hold of activists, people who are chronically online, and what they're doing is they are spreading these pro-Trump messaging and funding these campaigns at the grassroots level. And so when you're going away from bots and you're doing real people, that's there to not necessarily like sway people towards Trump, but it's there to divide the American public. That's really their ultimate goal. I just want to quickly say one more thing. I just remember when they asked Vladimir Putin, as kind of a little bit of a joke, they asked him, "Who do you want to win for president?" And what did Vladimir Putin said? He joked and he said Harris. And he did say that. I read that, and he said that in order to divide Americans, to cause political confusion. And so I'm just curious with what they're going to be reporting as this, like I said, kind of when you're looking at new reporting, don't just jump on and assume anything right away. Let's let the reporting play out. Let's see what the investigations bring. I'm wondering if with this bombing with the ballot boxes, like you were saying, I'm wondering if it's like actual Americans are doing it and trying to see like where they're, like how they're being, if it's maybe Russia's paying them. So, but it's really interesting.
And I wonder too, to a certain extent, aren't we all kind of chronically online now, right? You ask somebody, where do you get your news? It's not from NPR, it's not from the Associated Press or Washington Post or the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times, Miami Herald, wherever. It's not CNN or MSNBC, it's Facebook. I get it from Instagram. I get it from Twitter. I get it from YouTube, right? I get it from the podcast that I listen to in terms of this news and information. And so the algorithm is ultimately deciding what news and information we get, isn't it? Right?
Okay. I will readily admit that I am not technologically sophisticated on these apps. I do use them. However, I do have an almost 15-year-old daughter who schools me on this regularly.
Okay.
First of all, Facebook is for old people. So.
Okay. All right.
Technically online.
Yeah. So, I bring that up just to say that when I think about the influencing of elections, or foreign countries, for foreign leaders trying, and their supporters trying to influence elections, like on Facebook, maybe that worked 10 years ago. I don't know that would work now. I don't know that it will work 4 years from now, because when I think about every time there was a discussion about trying to ban TikTok, it would be hilarious. I'd go to pick up my daughter from school.
Yeah.
She'd get in the back of my car and she'd be like, "Mom, I'm being asked to call my senator again." Okay, she's not even old enough to vote, and I thought, you cannot beat this, because she's a dancer, so it's like all the little dance things that TikTok does. I don't even know how to use it, but I just thought to myself, she is getting her news from TikTok and Instagram and whatever,
from these influencers who
these influencers, whatever
they're
newer
spouting off
apps are coming.
information that may not be fact.
Yeah, I mean, but some of the ones that I'm more familiar with, I am good on Facebook.
Yeah.
But for her generation and people her age and maybe a little older than her, these different, this is just going to be such a moving target, because I would think that every new generation is going to have its own app that they think is for their generation,
right,
that they're getting their news from. And so
Facebook was mine when I was in college, because you had to have a college email to even get on there at the time. Chris, you are the veteran reporter here at the table, so you've had a lot of time and a lot of years to comb through and sift through data on election night, or just general reporting. In the world of NPR and public media, we still do it a little bit old school in that sense. And, we're not always first, but we always want to make sure that we're right. How does that play out? What do you see the future of reporting being, with the rise of these social media apps and the rise of, being first, but, knowing, I could delete that tweet later. I could just, I could scratch that piece of information to make it look like I wasn't completely wrong.
Oh, I know for sure that we have certainly gotten quick lessons in recognizing disinformation ahead of this election, and I suspect it's going to have to be brought up constantly from now on. If it hasn't already, it certainly will be, to be able to teach, educate people in the future, young people and old people for that matter too. Anybody that's just getting involved in trying to keep track online of what's happening, they're going to have to be schooled in what to look for, to be aware of the problems, and so they are not taken in. And hopefully, if they follow through, then if the mainstream media follows through as well, and continues to educate on what not to look for, and be aware of it, then maybe the future will still look bright in that respect, and in that we're going to get information that is correct. This gradual change at first, or the tough change at first, from only 4 sources or so, mainly 4 major networks on television.
Right.
And then, of course, in the major radio news networks like NPR and the like. But hopefully it'll spread out that all of the other places that people will seek out the information they look for will be correct, or at least will at least try to be correct. More so, and maybe with this election and all of the schooling and disinformation, maybe we'll follow through.
And just a reminder for folks tonight here on election night, we are wrapping up our coverage here in about 23 minutes. Still lots of results to pour through the course of the evening. You can get more information, of course, by heading over to npr.org, as well as listening to the top of the hour newscasts, as well as tuning in to Morning Edition tomorrow morning, beginning bright and early at 4 a.m. with local news at 6 a.m. with John Robinson. And it goes back to that first part of the conversation tonight, that we may not even know where we stand in terms of the national picture come tomorrow morning. And it is a common problem, at least lately, where you get 100,000 votes out of Arizona and you try to figure out what it all means in the grand scheme of things. But election night pizzas are being eaten across not only Indiana but the rest of the country as well. As we wind down the evening here, I would be remiss if I didn't ask for some prognostications in terms of what we think might happen, not necessarily in terms of the races, but maybe in the future of politics in general. What kind of an impact will AI and, sort of fake news have on elections moving forward? What kind of an impact will those stories of the American dream that maybe have now fallen on deaf ears as families find it harder to put dinner on the table or put a roof over a head of a house that they might own in that regard, or heck, even just the funding of news and switching off in terms of lots of people not wanting to pay to get past a firewall, whether it's a local news organization, and thus you are accessing only the free content, and the free content may not always be the right content. I should note, though, there is no paywall on lakeshorepublicmedia.org, and when you make a pledge of support at lakeshorepublicmedia.org, you're ensuring that conversations like this, as well as other election night conversations, reporting by Michael and Jonna and Dee, and of course Chris, are all possible here in Northwest Indiana. So I'll open it up to the floor here. What does the future look like in terms of journalism, news coverage, in terms of election night coverage, in terms of political talk?
So with in terms of with the technology side, I mean, AI is only going to get better, and it's only going to get just a lot more sophisticated, and not only just.
Yet it can't walk my dog for me. And it won't do my taxes. That's what I needed to do: walk the dogs, do my taxes, fold my laundry. Yeah.
Not only is it going to get better, but it's also going to be more accessible too. Meaning, more people are going to get access to these tools rather than just someone who is just getting better and who are sharpening their tools when they're learning to doing with AI. So I mean, we've already seen. I think this is definitely going to be like with the AI election, especially when you see with all the pictures of what we saw here in Indiana, what we've seen with the governor's race, and then what we're seeing just everything left and right and on the social media platform. So that's going to be continuing to be that. And I just think that with local coverage, it's more important now than ever, just with the local coverage and paying attention. I mean, we when we're online, we have just such this national lens, but like it's really local news. I mean, I say this all the time, and I said this on Regionally Speaking. It's just like local news reporters who are doing on the ground work, such as yourselves and everyone here in the studio. Please, be a member of your local public media station. Subscribe to your local paper. Just get involved, because that affects you more than at the national level. What happens locally, who you elect locally, such as the library board, the school board, that affects you 24/7 a lot more than what happens to you, than whose butt is seated in the Oval Office.
All politics are local, right, Marie?
All politics really, really, really are local. And Nico makes a great case that, yes, the local is just so undervalued. And I don't think anybody goes around and thinks to themselves like, well, I don't care about my local government. All I care about is the federal. But when you turn on the news or you go to your social media platforms, that's the news that gets the most coverage. So we get the most coverage about Congress or our president or the Supreme Court, and we get less coverage, or you have to be more specific in searching for it when it comes to local issues, whether at the state level or at the local level. But yeah, most of our lives are lived out under laws that come from the state and the local level. And then one thing that I always think that, like, when you ask what will the future look like, and obviously none of us really know, but one of these thoughts that I've always have bubbling in my mind is that whenever in every generation, it's like, we need the government to do this, or we need the government to do that. And then clearly there are things we want the government to do. But I like to remind people that all government is coercive. Government is allowed to use legal force to get you to do what you wouldn't otherwise do. And so we really need to, I just wish we could stop this spread of, there are clearly things that we need and we want our government to address, But I do have this sense that there's just too much, like, if there's a problem, instead of us addressing it, as a community, right, at the local level, like we want to, like, supersize it to the federal level, but it's like all government is coercive. It's like, it's about them, so the more power you give to government to decide something, the less power you have as the individual. And somehow I feel like as if that gets lost. That gets lost because, government is obviously a good thing, right? We want somebody to protect our borders. We want on a local level, we want someone to, like, figure out who's going to pick up our trash.
Who's going to plow the streets.
Who's going to plow the streets. So, but there needs to be more balance. Somehow I feel like as if all these candidate-centered elections and this polarization is like every problem that we have in our community, we're like looking at, like, how are we going to get the government? Like, if we could just get the right person in there, we will solve it. And if we could just hand this problem over to them,
But people don't want to vote because it's not the right person for the right seat and the perfect candidate, so to speak. Really quick, Chris, what are your thoughts on what happens to the future?
Well, I think at least my thoughts are just have to be, as I've mentioned, cautiously optimistic, I guess, which isn't a phrase that's being overused. It's going to be overused, but certainly I'm very concerned as to what the future is going to look like. I'm concerned, and here again, it's trying to wrest back all the power that's happening out of our hands, like Maria had mentioned, bringing it back local. Bringing it back to make sure that the local governments, and in turn we as the people who could choose who gets elected to the local positions, will have an opportunity to put in those offices, whether it happens to be a county council or a city council seat when it's time for those elections coming up, or whether it happens to be a state representative or a state senator, which we're deciding on now, in case of whether we're putting somebody back in the position that they held and we're seeking re-election, or a new position, as we learned tonight in one particular case, where we have changes happening. And we're going to have to, I think, make some decisions sometime soon, I hope, as to whether we're going to find ways to bring that power, or at least that the control, back in the hands of the residents that is going to affect the most.
We'll take a quick break here, and coming out of that break, we'll get the latest update from Michael Gallenberger with the latest round of numbers. You're listening to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media with myself, Tom Maloney. Lakeshore Public Media's Chris Nolte, Marie Eisenstein, and Nico Cassis from Indiana University Northwest. We'll be back again right after this break.
Family in our community, the building blocks for success with Lakeshore Public Media's Building Blocks Multimedia Initiative focused on early childhood development. This project empowers families with accessible and credible resources. And now, your donation will be doubled dollar for dollar, up to $100,000, thanks to the Legacy Foundation. Make a difference that lasts. Visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks and support this life-enhancing initiative today.
Hi, this is Steve Inskeep. When you roll out of bed, bleary-eyed and groggy, if you're like me, the first thing on your mind is getting something to wake you up. So turn on the radio. NPR's daily news program, Morning Edition, has been working through the night to get you the news you need. It's as essential to your morning as a good cup of coffee. So hit the ground running by listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tune in for Morning Edition from 4 to 9 a.m. with local news beginning at 6 here on Lakeshore Public Media, 89.1 FM.
It's 8:47. Good evening. I'm Michael Gallenberger. You're listening to live election coverage on Lakeshore Public Media. And now we have some of the results from LaPorte County starting to come in. These are some of the absentee numbers as well, apparently some of the election day numbers. Again, these are results specific to LaPorte County. President and Vice President of the United States, Republican Trump and Vance, 23,494. Democrat Harris and Walz, 10,573. United States Senator Republican Jim Banks, 21,841. Democrat Valerie McRae, 16,042. Libertarian Andrew Horning, 960. Governor and Lieutenant Governor, Republican Braun and Beckwith, 20,756. Democrat McCormick and Gooden, 16,999. Libertarian Rainwater and Hudson, 1,543. Indiana Attorney General Republican Todd Rokita, 22,979. Democrat Destiny Wells, 16,684. United States Representative District 1, again, this is just the LaPorte County portion of the district. Republican Randy Niemeyer, 12,893. Democrat Frank J. Mervan, 13,255. Libertarian Dakota Miskus, 621. U.S. Representative District 2, again in LaPorte County, Republican Rudy Yakum, 8,603. Democrat Lori A. Camp, 4,161. Libertarian William E. Henry, 475. State Senator District 8, Republican Mike Bohachek, 18,081. Democrat Leon P. Smith, 8,241. State Representative District 9, Republican Joel Florek, 6,965. Democrat Patricia A. Pat Boy, 8,218. And again, those are some of the early numbers so far from LaPorte County. For Lakeshore News, I'm Michael Gallenberger.
You're listening to live election night coverage here on Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM. We'll take a quick break here and go into the acceptance speech by now Governor-elect Mike Braun. We'll hear a few minutes of his acceptance speech this evening. Again, Jennifer McCormick has not yet given her losing speech as she is waiting for more numbers to come in across Lake County, Marion, and Hamilton counties. But we'll hear a little bit from Governor-elect Mike Braun.
Hi, this is Steve Inskeep. When you roll out of bed, bleary-eyed and groggy, if you're like me, the first thing on your mind is getting something to wake you up. So turn on the radio. NPR's daily news program, Morning Edition, has been working through the night to get you the news you need. It's as essential to your morning as a good cup of coffee. So hit the ground running by listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
Tune in for Morning Edition from 4 to 9 a.m. with local news beginning at 6 here on Lakeshore Public Media 89.1 FM. Are you curious about your baby's development? Want to discover what's really going on in your toddler's brain? Join Dr. Mary Jane Eisenhower of First Things First Porter County as she converses with local experts, parents, and practitioners about the building blocks for brain and language development. Tune in Wednesday night at 7 o'clock here on Lakeshore Public Media for Building Blocks, the podcast. And to find out more about Building Blocks, visit lakeshorepublicmedia.org/buildingblocks.
What a journey this has been. I think it was up at the Moontown Brewery that we celebrated. And the journey that I've been on over the last 7 years, most people would think you'd been crazy to do it in the first place. Dear, what do you think about that? No, it's good. Okay. All I can tell you is 7 years ago in August, when I declared to run for the U.S. Senate, there weren't many believers. And even folks close to you wondered, did you really have a game plan? Well, my game plan started very simply when I got to be the luckiest man alive to marry this lady here. Now you do all these fancy commercials and they don't even talk about you, they talk about my wife. We were lucky, I think, going way back when we made the decision, unlike most did then, to move back to our hometown. And when we did that, that set the stage for everything else that followed. Most people didn't think that made sense either. But had we not done that, I'm almost certain we wouldn't be here this evening. Yeah, when you marry someone that says the priority is to have my own business and raise a family, how in the hell could you argue with that? So we came back and did just that. We lived the American dream. Blessed with 4 kids, 3 of them running the business I ran for 37 years, and a family that's always been behind me and Maureen in anything that we did. That truly is what life is about.
That was Mike Braun earlier this evening making his acceptance speech for Indiana governor here on election night and bringing up the American dream. 4 kids, a wife, a long-lasting job, and a trip to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and now a trip to Indianapolis at the Statehouse. An American dream that not a lot of people get to accomplish. And in Mike Braun's accomplishment, it adds to 2 decades of rule from the GOP at the Statehouse. And I can remember the last couple of election cycles, the Democratic Party of Indiana taking a step back and saying, you know, we really got to hunker down, and our goal is to get so many seats or so many candidates in office by this year. What is the future of the Indiana Democratic Party here as we wrap up? Because it is, they got a long road ahead. And the flip side of that, how does the Indiana GOP continue to run on a platform of, we've got to make things better for Hoosiers when they're the ones who have been in charge for the last 15 or 20 years? So I'll throw it out to the whole table here, taking either conversation, either topic in terms of, you know, how does the Indiana Democratic Party survive another tough loss at the polling places?
Well, I think one way that you can look at it is that just take a look at over our state line over to our neighbor, you know, next to us in Illinois. You know, Illinois is getting bluer and bluer and bluer. And I think for Indiana is going to go to the opposite. I think it's just going to get redder and redder. And as long as we have things such as gerrymandering in place, you know, polls still closing at 6 p.m. local time. You know, I believe we're maybe one of 2 or 3 states that close at 6 p.m. local time. You know, everyone else is either at 7 or 8 o'clock local time, you know, making it harder to vote, you know, with voter ID laws. So I think that the system is whatever the system, in my opinion, I think whatever the system is in place is just there for a reason. So, and I think this kind of demonstrated that with this hat trick that the Republican Party that did. Well, I guess you can say 4 with Donald Trump, you know, taking Indiana. I guess that you can kind of see by how many points, you know, is it plus 16? Is it plus 10? Is it plus 12? I guess we won't know that until everything is completely counted. Mm-hmm. But I just think that it's just going to, I just think that what's going to happen. I think maybe the Democratic Party maybe have to just look at themselves just internally, but I don't even know if they need to necessarily do that, because I think with the McCormick race, with the Destiny's Wells race, I think they really did a great job, and I really do. It was a hard fought race, but it's just really hard. But it's just a matter. I'm really curious to see what Jennifer McCormick is going to do in another 4 years. Maybe she'll give it a go. I really think she should. I think to maybe even further close the margins. You know, she got national attention and support with the Democratic Governors Association, with Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, coming out and campaigning for her. So I think it's, you know, I don't know if they have to do necessarily a lot of self-reflection, but I think I'm actually amazed at how much gains the Democratic Party really did make.
Marie.
So I think that sometimes it really just depends on what unit you're looking at, right? Because if you look at the state level, you're like, oh, in these statewide races, Republicans are more likely to win. But we obviously know that within Northwest Indiana or other parts of Indiana, there are pockets of like Democratic dominance. So like if you look at Lake County, you're going to see far more Democrats elected than Republicans. And what's that physics principle? A will in motion stays in motion. It is very, very hard when you have had one party, whether it's at the state level or the county level, in power, that just keeps winning election cycle after cycle,
right,
for that cycle to be broken. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but you had brought up like Illinois is getting bluer and bluer and Indiana is getting redder and redder. And I cannot say that I have done any extensive research on this, but there is something that I saw, I don't know whether it was 4 months ago, 6 months ago, that literally suggested that as a population, as a nation, we are sorting ourselves by political ideology. That where people are choosing to move, to live.
So you get those pockets of these people are like me.
Yes.
And I want to live there.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. So, and this to me was an interesting thing to think that people are saying, we're going to move, and I want to make sure that I'm moving somewhere that has, conservative values or liberal values, Democrat versus Republican, and that we're literally sorting ourselves this way. So, and that would make breaking the dominance in an area even more difficult.
It certainly would. And then you get children, as we're seeing in Indiana now, where, it's a conservative state and younger kids want places with more liberal viewpoints. And so you get that brain drain, and you get young populations moving out of areas, older populations moving into areas, or just staying put as the kids do move out. I've lived in Indiana, I've lived in Wisconsin, I've lived in Illinois. And, for me, I think I see a lot of Republicans in the Chicagoland area moving to Northwest Indiana specifically because the Chicagoland area is so blue. They want to go where they have people that have like-minded values with them move to Northwest Indiana. It's just right outside of Chicago. It's the same amount of commute. Taxes are a little bit cheaper, right?
And for all of us older people on Facebook, on our local community groups, I'm on like What's Up Munster, right? And the general complaint.
Those are my favorite groups. Those are my favorite groups.
Right?
Yes,
and honestly, I'm on a group because I have a brother who lives in Logan, Utah, so I joined his group. And it's like the same complaints, like, they'll tell you that all the people moving from California are raising all the property rates in Utah, and we in Indiana are like, all those people coming from Illinois, our property housing prices are just skyrocketing because they're willing to pay more.
And I should note, I sold my house during the post-bubble peak, and I was a beneficiary of that. And hey, I'm not going to complain. Chris, what are your thoughts here as we wrap up the evening?
Well, as far as the Democratic Party is concerned, I think, and Nico's mentioned some good points. The fact that there's a start. The question now is if the start can be expanded, whether people like Jennifer McCormick and Destiny Wells can be able to carry that on to other people and get them to be able to fashion campaigns that in turn will be able to persuade more people to make the switch from either from undecided or maybe from Republican to become vote for Democrats, and in turn will strengthen the possibility of adding more Democratic strongholds besides just Lake County. The local officials, I think, for the most part, are doing the best they can do. They're kind of like traffic cops in a way. They have to take care of their localities, and they're doing the best to keep them strong. But maybe with the election the way it is, that we have another Republican in the Statehouse and the governor's office, that maybe we are going to have an opportunity for more people to do a bit more brainstorming and trying to come up with some ways to help chip away more at the Republican stronghold.
We'll have to, of course, see how all of that plays out.
And a lot of it, too, we still don't know if for sure, although there's still a pretty strong chance there's going to be a supermajority in the state legislature.
It looks that way.
But if there are enough changes with Democrats taking over some of the Republican seats, then that might change.
It certainly could. And, of course, as we wrap up tonight, I want to thank Miguel Ortega, Michael Gallenberger, Dee Dotson, of course, Chris Nolte, Nico Cassis, Marie Eisenstein for joining us here tonight, making election night coverage possible. And once again, Donald Trump victorious here in the Hoosier State. Mike Braun is the governor-elect. Jim Banks is the U.S. Senate-elect. And Todd Rokita has won re-election as Attorney General. For all of us here at Lakeshore Public Media, I'm Tom Maloney. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening in. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates and results from John Robinson tomorrow morning on Morning Edition starting at 6 a.m. locally. And thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again in 2 years, right? No election cycle next year, so 2 more years. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Victory in either one of these states. Hopefully we will have an answer to one or two of those questions, if not both, in the coming hours.
Meanwhile, not surprisingly, perhaps former President Donald Trump has been declared the winner in Florida, Ohio, and Texas, according to the Associated Press. The AP is